Hello and welcome to the Bald Ambition podcast. I'm your very bald host, Mookie Spitz. And the one with the ambition today, who is also bald as hell, is Mr. Jeff Goebel. Welcome aboard the podcast, Jeff.
I'm glad to be with my brethren right here, the bald guy.
Jeff is a full-time musician, an awesome guitar player, and he's also the daddy-o of VH Stories, Van Halen Stories.
That's
As far as I could tell, he's one of the biggest Van Halen fans, and we'll go into all of that in a second. But we met just about a week or two ago in front of the Van Halen childhood home in Pasadena, California, at 1881 Las Lunas. It's where Alex and Eddie essentially grew up, where they started jamming together in the living room with their mom. We could go into all that too. And we met right around what would have been Eddie Van Halen's 71st birthday. So I feel like we got a blessing from the bros to talk about all things Van Halen.
Right on. Cool. Glad to be here with you.
I think for our listeners, regardless of whether they're a raging Van Halen fan like you and I are,
right,
there's something magical and special about Van Halen. And different people have talked about it, been trying to wrap their heads around it. And our bald heads are coming together about all things Van Halen today. Based on everything that you've learned and celebrated about the brothers and the whole band, what's that mojo? What is the Van Halen mojo?
Well, I was just saying this morning that it's actually the brothers. It's the brotherhood of the two brothers, right? The Van Halen mojo is both of them together. That's the real mojo. Whenever they play together, what comes out is something totally unique that only the two of them can do together. And that combination, their chemistry, as being brothers and being together all the way over from Europe when they were kids and all of that, and then to grow up together playing piano, and then later, Alex goes to he started on acoustic. Everybody kind of knows this story, but Alex had an acoustic guitar, and Ed got drums, and then Alex started playing his drums, and Ed switched to the guitar. Never had any intention to be a guitar player, but then he ends up becoming Eddie Van Halen, right, by accident. So yeah, it's their brothers and their chemistry that makes Van Halen special. In their personalities being so different, they're very different, and they complement each other in a different way. Like Alex was always kind of the business guy, and he kind of took care of that side of the thing, and then Ed was sort of the creative guy, and together they had this magical mojo between each other. And then they added David Lee Roth, who had his own mojo, as we know, and Michael Anthony held it all down and made it. He was the glue that made it all work. So they had a magic all of their own together, but it started out with the brothers and their particular chemistry,
I think that's bang on point. And the brothers are emigres. So their father, Jan, is from the Netherlands. He's a Dutch musician, was a clarinet player, jazz musician. He met their mom, Eugenia, in Indonesia, which for a while was a Dutch colony. So you have that kind of historical connection. And the Van Halen brothers are hybrids. They're Dutch Indonesian. A lot of people don't think about that Asian persuasion in the mix, but they're a cross-cultural mix. And then they emigrated from Holland to California. So it's all new to the boys, right? You've got that doubly kind of foreign mix coming into America, land of opportunity, Pasadena, California. You and I saw it. You've been there many times, I'm sure, the landmark of the house. But that's suburban America back, in the 50s in 62. California.
I came over in 62.
62. All right. Early 60s.
Yeah, so, 62. and they immigrated, and they came because there was family on her side, on mom's side, that were in California, and those family members were telling mom about how great California was, and that there was oranges on the trees. They could pick off the trees, and they could just eat right out of the trees. And it's true. There's still a lot of, I was just talking to a guy from Pasadena the other day, and he said back in the early days, way before them even, those were orange groves in that area. So underneath all the suburban stuff was once orange groves, and what's left is still oranges here and there. But that's where the family got the idea about America and about coming to America, what it'd be like.
And it wasn't an easy ride, right? So I think that dad had trouble adjusting. He had to work some menial jobs just to keep the family together. And Eddie and Alex were not privileged kids.
No,
They had to work in high school. Didn't like Eddie had a newspaper route, didn't he, to save money for his gear? And didn't they
they did.
paint like addresses onto the street?
Yes, illegally.
Wasn't that one of their gigs?
They would charge people, tell them they were like the street department or whatever, and they would get them to pay. And local police found out, they put a stop to it. But yeah, they did paper routes. A couple of people that were on my podcast, actually, it's these brothers that used to do the paper routes with them. Actually, Tom Broderick, who's one of my guests, his brothers were with the Van Halens on those paper routes back in the day.
To me, that's awesome because you are like 1 degree of separation from all of this Van Halen, and you met Eddie too. You had the selfies, and
Yeah,
we're going to show some of the selfies and
yeah,
video and image swag as we talk. But
yeah.
but when I'm talking to you, I feel like I'm almost talking to the band and all of this network surrounding the band. I think that is so badass.
Yeah, that was sort of like well, I started doing podcasting like you prior to the Van Halen podcast. I did a podcast I called Musical Journeys, which was just an exploration of people's careers in the music business, how they started from their garage or whatever, and how they ended up wherever they ended up. Might have been with Whitesnake, or might have been a local guy, or whoever. Different kinds of people, different kinds of levels, different kinds of situations. And that podcasting kind of led me to a guy named Greg Renoff. And Greg Renoff wrote a book on Van Halen called Van Halen Rising, which is a definitive history of the first part of their career, which would have been before they were famous, in their teens and all the way up to 1978. And that book got me so excited. I went out to Tulsa, Oklahoma to do a podcast on the stage where they played in 1978 at Kane's Ballroom. So you can find that on my channel. There's an interview with Greg Renoff at Kane's Ballroom, and we talk all about Van Halen on that. But that's what got me kind of thinking about not only podcasting, but podcasting. Van Halen came a little bit later. So I was podcasting with him there, right? I was doing that. But then I always had this love for Van Halen, and that's why I was there. I mean, I did other, like I said, I just did musician podcasts on careers, right? But then I ended up doing this Van Halen one because I love Van Halen like you and I, right? And then later down the road, I ended up doing this Van Halen Stories podcast, and it just sort of happened after he passed. I realized that there probably wasn't going to be any sort of post discussion on his impact, and that's where I got into it.
That's incredible. And this circle of people that you've talked to is telling the definitive story through these testimonials. So
Exactly.
you interviewed him. What other kinds of folks have you talked to get this full 360 on the band, really in a unique kind of way? I don't know too many other sources that are as diligent as you are and as open-minded and as engaging in terms of just
Thanks.
people opening up about their experience with the band.
Well, I have to say, Greg was he was sort of like my mentor in this thing, because we became friends when I did that podcast with him. And then somewhere along the line, somebody from Nashville approached me because they would see all my posts about Van Halen all the time. And they were looking to do a documentary like on one album of theirs. And that never really panned out. But in that process, I got Greg involved in it. And Greg and I started talking a lot. And so we became close. And then Greg's focus was the early days. So the people that he interviewed were all those early days folks. But what I did in the podcast one was do some of the same people that he interviewed, but in video, right? Video podcast instead of an edited, it's, more long form. And then what I did was add on to that idea, which was to bring in contemporary guitarists of his time, people in the journalism side of the business, like a Guitar World, Guitar Player magazine, people that did his first interviews. So I had not only all of his friends when he was a kid, but I had the guitar players in the community, the guitar players that were at his height, people that were like Steve Stevens has been on from Billy Idol, George Lynch has been on. So people that were direct contemporaries. And so I just filled out the idea of what Greg was doing across different types of people, not just their friends from the early days.
Yeah, and I've been watching some of these exchanges, like with Lynch and Steve Stevens, and they're all just sharing this almost kid-like thrill for everything Van Halen. And it's hard for some of the younger folks to realize that back in the day, back in 1978, 79, when they broke out, rock and roll was not really popping. It's almost like Van Halen was a throwback that blew it all up in a way that was just so exciting and refreshing. And they relate that excitement in a very personal way.
I think that Greg kind of covered that in his book, that they saved, I think they said they saved heavy metal or whatever from disco, right? Because we're 78, 79, 77, of course, Saturday Night Fever, Star Wars and all these things are going on at the same time. So yeah, there was this decline, right? And then Van Halen just re-energized the whole thing, which led to the Sunset Strip, 80s bands and the glam and all that later. But I always like to think about Van Halen in the kind of same time frame as AC/DC. They're right in the late 70s, coming into the 80s. And there was this time where before glam, you had these bands that were pretty raw, and pretty not very glam, if you really think about it. Pretty much straight ahead rock and roll. And that's kind of what hit me at first. They were almost to that point in 81 where I got introduced to them, but it spurred on another, from basically from when they came out 78 to the 93 when Nirvana hit. That was the era that they spawned. They basically created that whole period from their inspiration. And if you ask anybody from that era, Van Halen always comes up as one of the bands.
Yeah, in a sense, the trailblazing band. So you had Eddie's pyrotechnical reinvention of rock guitar.
Absolutely.
And then you had David Lee Roth with the glam effect. So in ways, I kind of see it as Led Zeppelin methed up, because Jimmy Page brought a sense of humor to the electric guitar, and he brought a sense of pinched playfulness to a lot of his riffing and songwriting. And Robert Plant with the big hair, the Janis Joplin kind of ethos, really glammed it up in a way that was very 60s. So a generation before. And Van Halen not only Americanized that, but again, just quantum boosted it to a whole new level that just blew the doors off everybody. And it wasn't even just sonically. Like when you heard them on the radio, you just stopped what you were doing. You were like, what the hell is going on here? But also in terms of live performance, this is before streaming and digital. Bands released an album, you had the vinyl, with the big cover and the lyrics, liner notes. And then you went to go see them. They would tour. And the whole ecosystem of music was so raw and physical. And Van Halen took it to that new level in a way no one had ever seen before.
Right. I mean, because I got introduced to rock shows in 1979 when Kiss came through. So I wasn't aware of Van Halen at that point. I came in not until '82 that I saw him do. It was a video from 1981. I think I told you the Unchained video that I saw, but it was on an '82 show, Don Kirshner's rock concert. So there was just like, because we didn't really have the MTVs or anything. We had, the late night TV shows that sometimes featured videos, and that's how I kind of got into it. But yeah, that whole there was that moment where TV started to, well, it did with the Beatles. If you ask anybody from the era before me, they'll say Ed Sullivan was where they got inspired to play guitar, and when that happened on TV. And for me, that was Don Kirshner's rock concert. And as I told you, the Van Halens used to watch the same show. I didn't even know it, but they used to watch the same show and think that they might be on there one day, and then they were. And when they were, I was watching, and when I was watching, I was like, this is what I want to do with my life.
Absolutely. And the two brothers especially were fans. Like Eddie talks about seeing Jimmy Page playing at the Hollywood Bowl. And then he figured out like the beginning of tapping with the Heartbreaker solo. Instead of pulling off, Eddie figured he could bridge it, with the finger and then tap it for more dynamics. And then all hell broke loose. And the original name of Van Halen, I think, was Rat Salad, which is a Black Sabbath song. So, and they were a cover band. I was in Chicago years ago, and I was at a party, and I met a wonderful woman who had her sweet 16 birthday party not far from the Van Halen bros, and they played on her lawn. And the bros were paid in beer. So they gave him a keg, and in exchange, Eddie rolled up the 72 Marshall and Alex the kit, and they just played. I think they were Mammoth at the time. And then it was just, hey, play for beer. So they're raw. They were into it, and they had to work for it. This is another aspect of music, I think, that the younger generation doesn't appreciate, that when there's really no digital, you had to self-promote. You had to go out there, and you probably start as a cover band, and they did. And then you start doing Sweet 16 and birthday parties in your neighborhood, literally. And then you start gearing it up. You crawl, walk, run. You get bigger and bigger gigs. You start doing Gazaris. You start doing the whiskey. You start doing the clubs in the area, and people would go see you, and you would build a following, show by show, little promo disc by promo disc. And they worked for it. They were a working band, and it shows a lot like the Beatles. You brought up the Beatles with Ed Sullivan. The Beatles were in Hamburg, Germany, I think, for a couple years, of just playing grueling 5, 6, 7 nights a week. And that's where they got their chops. They're a working band. You don't just go into a studio and plug shit in. You're jamming. You're getting the crowd reaction. You're evolving your talent, your chops, your performance with a live audience. And it's kind of an emergent thing. And you don't see that these days, right? Hardly at all.
Like, I kind of grew up with my father was very, very driven salesman for a medical company. And I would watch him work. He'd be working all late into the night and early mornings, and he was always gone on the road. And I just that was kind of like what we grew up with. So we just thought that was normal. So when I got into music or whatever I got into, that kind of work ethic was just what I considered totally normal, right? So when I got the bug, though, for Van Halen and I started playing guitar, that work wasn't so hard to do because I loved doing it. And hours would go by, I'd be sitting here with my guitar, it just totally it engulfed me, what I mean, in a passion that is why I'm talking to you today, all these years later. Right.
Yeah.
Great.
It's really the application and the doing. And you really get a feel for that when you get into the groove of Eddie and Alex is really the backbone musically. And Michael
Yeah.
Anthony, obviously, the background vocals, and he's an excellent bass player. But the Eddie Alex groove, you could feel that these two grew up together jamming. And
Oh, yeah.
Eddie, in particular, had a unique opportunity, not only being born a genius with that kind of potential talent, but having a drummer in the living room, growing up with that, and that
Yeah.
naturalness and the thousands of hours of just riffing. That's a subtext people don't talk about enough, I think, which is
I agree
how
with you. Yeah.
musicians are made. You're born, but you're also made.
Right. There's I interviewed their producer for the last album, John Shanks. And John Shanks is one of the world's greatest producers. He's been Bon Jovi's producer for over a decade, maybe two now. And he's in Bon Jovi, by the way, playing guitar. But John, was there with the guys, and he mentioned to me just what you're saying, that he would watch them in the studio, and he said Ed had to do is turn his shoulder a certain way, and his brother would read it right, and they would be able to read each other's most minute movements to what they were going to do, and they would read each other. And this is something they obviously picked up doing thousands of hours of playing together. Obviously, the guitar was fairly easy for Ed, is what he said, But you got to remember that Ed started playing piano when he was a little boy. And so the hands were already developed by the time he picked up, and his ear was developed. He was able to, like he said in the Smithsonian interview that I was at, he had, didn't know how to read, but he could hear the changes well enough that he could fake his music teacher out when he tried to get him to read. He found out later that he couldn't read, but it was because Ed had such good ears, even with the piano, that by the time he hits guitar, he's got a lot of facility between his ears already, and in his hands already. So when he says it was easy for him, it was easy probably because he had done so much time on the piano, to be honest.
You bring up another awesome point, which is not only the 1,000 hours of just grinding, but
Yeah.
the zero bullshit attitude. There's oftentimes a map versus territory conflict for a lot of musicians, where they feel they need to be able to read music. They feel they need perfect pitch. And they feel they need to know everything about music theory and the instrument before they could really do much of anything. And
Yeah.
the Van Halen brothers took the opposite approach. They knew music theory, they studied, but it's really about balls to the wall. They're jamming, they're letting it out, and they're doing it organically with each other, and they're just making music, and they get
Right.
better at it. And I think that is their essential rooted power too, which is it doesn't necessarily come from here. It just comes all from here, refined through hours of practice. And again, just happening to have that kind of lightning talent. And Alex often doesn't get credit as a drummer. And I think he had a phenomenally distinctive sound. And he
Oh
was
yeah.
in pocket with Eddie. So you can't really think about Eddie without Alex. You can't just unplug one guy from the other.
Yeah, I think you hear that too if you separate them. And there's been times when Ed's been playing in a jam or whatever, and there's that element is missing from the sound. You hear it, you're like, well, that's not what it is, but it shouldn't be, because it's not his brother, right? And that special thing that happens between people in bands. I was just making this comment to my band about, there's this moment in Van Halen's history when Van Halen 3 comes out, and it's not a success. And as far as I know, this is mostly Eddie by himself, and so it plays to the idea that it's about the chemistry of his brother and him, and it's about when they were with Roth, they had that extra element, and then with Michael, and then when it was Sammy and Michael, there was another version and vibe of that, and that's made from the soup of those four people. Ed would always say it's a soup, we mix it up. Well, that's what it is. It's literally their chemistry is mixed together, and when you put that together, you get something totally unique. And when you pull one person out of any band, you've seen this forever, right? Sometimes they're lucky. Sometimes it's like Van Halen when they got Hagar. Sometimes it's like AC/DC when they got, went from Bon Scott to Brian Johnson. A rare occurrence. But lightning can strike twice, and you can get that second chemistry that is equivalent. But it didn't hurt that they had the Eddie and Alex together to start, as the base and the backbone, as you said. And then Sammy, of course, had his thing, and they did it. They were able to pull it off. They were so confident, man. When they kept saying how great it was going to be, I was like, God, I hope it's good, guys, because I just watched '84. It's going to be hard to top that. And it was good.
Sometimes, if you're lucky, the sum is greater than its individual parts. And you had the Eddie Alex backbone, but you did have David and Michael, and it was unique, even circumstantially, in all the ways we're talking about. And then the leap to Sammy Hagar, Van Hagar. Now, fans are divided here. And I'm curious about, I'm getting the feeling, and seeing your other interviews and stuff, that you're not only okay with Van Hagar, but you think that they rocked too. And I'll just be transparent and say that I think Van Hagar rocked. I think they kept it solid all the way through Balance. And then we could talk about what happened after Balance, but solid 20 years of genius, in my humble, bald opinion.
Well, in my humble, bald opinion, the transition to grunge in 92, 93 was horrific for any of the glam bands. They all pretty much went from playing, sold out rooms to nobody there within weeks, right? That's the kind of stories you hear anyway. And Van Halen was able to kind of partner with bands like Alice in Chains and take them out on tour. And they were able to kind of not only survive that, but thrive through that period, which is, I always say this about bands like AC/DC or even Bon Jovi. When they're the original version, like, because we would get the spin-off versions of each of these bands, right? There would be like a band that was kind of like Van Halen, and there'd be one that kind of like Bon Jovi. But the ones that survived were the originals, and they were able to make it through in these times. I mean, it was tough in the 90s for, like, even Bryan Adams had trouble in the 90s in the US, or Bon Jovi. They were huge in Europe in the mid 90s. They were so big. Bon Jovi was so big in Europe in the mid 90s that Van Halen opened for Bon Jovi in Europe in the mid 90s. So Europe was a different animal than us in that period, but those bands were the originals were able to survive, and up until right now, AC/DC is still out there doing it to some degree. I mean, with who they have left, Brian and Angus. But it's amazing that some of those bands are still even out there at all.
Hello, baby. From the second I heard that opening from 5150, Good Enough, that song, which apparently that was kind of laid out with Roth. And in the multiverse somewhere, there's a version of David Lee Roth doing that song. And it just blows the mind to think about that. But from that opening, with Eddie's E string tuned down to B, and him just riding that vibrato bar, and the pinched harmonics. And it was just like really Van Halen 2.0. That was announcing to the world that we're back. We didn't lose any of the mojo, and we are going to continue to kick ass. And I think they did. In retrospect, even though fans can be nitpicky, that's an amazing accomplishment, to your point, to keep that momentum going and that raw energy, and in ways up it a few notches. Eddie talked about learning how to be better songwriters in the Van Hagar years. They changed keys with more facility. The songs were more sophisticated. In my humble, bald-headed opinion, the song 5150 is absolutely unbelievable. Where the hell did that rhythm come from?
Oh,
That is unbelievable. That's like an Achilles' last stand, fallen from heaven and up from hell at the same time. And that guitar solo from 515, which I think is Eddie's longest,
mhm.
is unbelievable from a musical point of view, all the way up to Balance with Belucitherium. I don't even know how to pronounce that song, which
Right.
I think is a masterpiece of just Eddie instrumental blazing guitar melodic playing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Eddie, you know, it's funny because they're just announced that they're going to put out the new version of that, the new uh, remixed version with the new vinyl and the new Live Without a Net DVD redone. And I was going to mention that video because it's one of the best, definitely one of the best videos of him, but at a period where he was so like fully developed at every technique that he could do, right? And when he did a solo on that thing, it's like 15 minutes of every little thing that he ever came up with. And that is probably one of the most amazing solos that was ever put down on video. And I was going to say this, there was a moment where I was at the Smithsonian. It was the Smithsonian? No, at the Metropolitan Museum when they were showing Eddie's guitar there. The Frankenstein was at the Met.
I saw that too in New York. It, I was
So,
I was touching the glass trying to get the mojo from the
right.
Frankenstrat.
Yeah, that's the real deal. People think it wasn't the real deal, but that was the real deal. Anyway, the while I'm there, you know, there's a room where they were showing videos of the different people, and Eddie came up on the screen. And I looked over, and there's a bunch of kids, and you know, the Met is it's more than just one exhibit. It's a massive place, right? So people are filtering in that are not even really there for the guitars. But there's a couple of kids and their parents sitting there, and they were watching that solo right on the screen, and it was like I was like reliving my childhood, going, "This is what it was like not to know all this," you know, and all of a sudden to be dumped on you, and you're like, "Oh my god, this is amazing," right? And these kids are they're all just like, "Oh my god." You know, after you've done it for like, you know, your fan like me and you forever and ever, you kind of get a little, you know, jaded, but you get used to it. And then you realize, oh yeah, this is pretty amazing. And that video's awesome.
Yeah, it is. The whole Live Without a Net, I think, is just a terrific. I think it was shot over 2 days, so
Yeah, yeah.
it's a little bit fragmented. You know, the outfits change almost from shot to shot. They took the best moments of two shows, if I've got that right,
I think you may be right.
for the video. Is that correct?
I don't know if that was that one or maybe it was the one after that that they did that. I know they did a second that one in the Mac.
It's an awesome expose of the genius. And talking about the Frankenstrat for a second, and again for our viewers and listeners, one thing that's not that well known. I mean, we're obviously into it, but this idea of reinventing the electric guitar. And before you play, I play, you'd have two choices when you walked into a guitar shop before Eddie Van Halen. You know, on
Right.
the left, you could see the Gibsons, and on the right, the Fenders. And the Gibsons were generally classified as having a humbucker pickup, which is the double coil, for a
Right.
thicker, kind of meatier sound with more sustain, and a thick neck that had wood polish on it.
Mm-hmm.
And on the Fender side, you had the single coil pickup with a sharper, more piercing sound, and a raw, kind of unfinished neck, which ostensibly was a little bit harder to play. It didn't have the ebony or rosewood fingerboards of the Gibsons, usually maple, sometimes rosewood, but really just a block of wood with frets on it, with that single coil attack. And
Mm-hmm.
Eddie merged these two with the Frankenstrat in different iterations, where he took the neck and the feel of the Fenders. He loved that raw kind of feel, but he loved the thicker, chunkier sound of the Gibsons, and he created his own guitar from it.
Right, and we're the beneficiaries of what they call the super strat, which was like the cross pollination, as he said, of the two guitars, and that became, I mean, for me, as I came up and saw him, that was the first thing I wanted was a super strat. You know, I was immediately, I almost ended up with a Les Paul, but I didn't. But yeah, my love affair with the super strat is like complete. I mean, it's pretty much all I own. I mean, I do have Les Paul regular customs and or standards and different guitars, but primarily, if you look around my room, you'll see his super strat over there. It's on the wall. I built that one, and that one's exact replica that I could get all the way down to every part, every single thing. And yeah, and it's this Northern Ash, which is super heavy like his was, and even the neck profile, everything is the same. The Gibson sticker on the Strat headstock, the whole 9 yards. Even the crazy strap that let me show it to you. Crazy strap that he made. Out of probably it's a dog chain and this whole thing, right? He was like a mad scientist with hardware. He'd go find hardware and he'd put together these homemade contraptions, and he would reinvent everything, right? By just messing around. It didn't like even this was cut out with a was it a soldering iron. So this is rough, it's not this is a copy off the actual, one, and it has the rough edges just like the real thing, and you can kind of see it, right? You can see the rough edges.
It looks beautiful. And for folks just listening to audio, Jeff is showing off the version of the Frankenstrat. It's got a Stratocaster body and neck, but it's kind of jerry-rigged together.
Yep, that's what it was.
It's got one humbucker pickup.
Yep.
In the bridge position, one volume knob, so you don't fuck around with all the gizmos and bullshit. And Eddie was just raw. Just plug that mofo right into a Marshall and let loose.
Well, I mean, it's an amazing thing, that he came up with, and it became the standard of the industry, which is wild.
Yeah, and people have been struggling for years to recapture the Brown sound. And the Brown sound was Eddie's unique tone, which was thick as mud, but at the same time piercing and distinctive, really emotional and groovy. And when you peel away the layers, it really boiled down to just a guitar that he chopped together in his garage with one humbucker, with one volume knob, no tone control, soldered into the body, and a Marshall jacked up, maybe with some good mic placement. It doesn't get too much complicated than that. And then Eddie's fingers and soul. It's the guitar player, not necessarily the guitar or the rig. There's that apocryphal story of Ted Nugent being backstage and asking Eddie if he could play his guitar through his stack because Ted wanted to get that Brown sound. And then Eddie goes, sure. And he hands Ted the guitar all plugged in to the rack. And well, it sounded like Ted.
Yeah, that's the thing is I have friends who played the guitar, played the amp, and those people have been on my podcast. We've talked about it, and they've been right there with him when he played, even acoustically on the electric guitar. And they said he had the way that he dug into the string was unique, unamplified, and it sounded, there's an audio recording that Steve Rosen made, who has a book out on him called Tone Chaser, and some of the early recordings, you can hear him playing an electric guitar, but acoustically. And you can hear that sound of his hands and how that was unamplified. And it's amazing that your hands just just the way that you grab it and hold it, and what amount of pressure on you, whether it's in your picking hand or on your fretted hand. You could see it in videos too. There's been some cool videos that have come out where you can actually see the 78 shots of his hand, and he had this amazing facility to be able to really dig in or not dig in, and he could switch it like at light speed. So he had this amazing attack, but then he had this amazing legato technique that was super smooth, and he'd alternate between the two different types of techniques in a way that I think that was one of the things for me is that I realized how he did some of the things he did, and how when one moment you're picking and one moment you're not picking, and how that was unique to his sound. That made part of his unique tone of the Brown sound, or what people attribute to his style, was the combination of his right and left hand, and the way that they attacked a guitar, and what he did pick and what he didn't pick. He could pick every note if he needed to, or he could do legato or a combination of both. And it was that unique combination of both that I don't think that we heard very much before him, if ever. That kind of, especially not that kind of speed and that kind of intensity. I thought it was just, when I first heard his playing, the speed really blew me away, but it was also that the intensity of it in the rock, because there are probably, classical players he played similar technically, but they didn't have the tone, so that you didn't get that vibe, and you didn't see fire on a gong behind it while he was doing it. That was a little bit of, the show part was kind of, along with the sonics, were just blowing me out of my, well, not on my chair, off my feet, because I was standing up when I saw it, but it was amazing.
Eddie's about average height, but he had big hands, like a huge reach.
It's like, some people tell me different things about his hands. Okay, so his hands were actually not so big, over, like, as in, like, Yngwie Malmsteen has huge hands, long fingers. Okay, you see a lot of great guitar players with long fingers. Eddie didn't really have that, but he had very muscular hands, from what I understand, and his stretch was insane.
Yeah.
So
The
yeah,
ice cream man 3-octave pull,
yeah.
right?
When you see that, you think this guy can't have. He had the most unbelievable stretch, but he had pretty average but muscular hands, from what everybody says. And if you go to the rock walk on in Hollywood and you put your hands in his handprints, you'll see what I mean. Pretty average size, but they were, my friend Phil X, Phil X from Bon Jovi, and Phil X and the Drills. He said he had meaty hands. That's what how he responded. He was talking about he had big meaty hands, and I think he probably did have very muscular hands, but his the length wasn't so much as the thickness and the way he could stretch. Because we'd see those, just pictures of his stretch. It's just, but that's got to be from being a kid playing piano, and as you're developing and you're already stretching these wide stretches on piano before you get on guitar, and then you get on guitar and he's, like you said, working it constantly. As he's growing, as his body's growing, now he gets this amazing ability from his hands. That
The piano origins, I think, are significant because piano is a percussion instrument. You're
yeah,
hitting it, and you're using both your hands to
yeah,
coordinate rhythm with melody, and then the tapping technique seems to be an extension of that, where you're thinking beyond the conventional approach to a guitar and looking
I
at
agree.
the guitar as a percussion instrument. You're hitting it, you're tapping it, you're using both hands, which is an interesting evolution of that origin as a piano player. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
what's wild, and this is a bit inside sports, but I think our viewers and listeners will eat this stuff up too, which is he used mostly 3 fingers. And to me, as a guitar player, I've always found this interesting about Eddie, where when you hear it, you think that he's just all over the fretboard and he's lightning fast and precise. But for the most part, I would say 95% of the time, Eddie's playing with 3 fingers, to the point where, as you mentioned, he's got the big stretch. So conventional guitar players will be 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And the guitar is strung to the 5th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, whether it's legato or pick. But Eddie used really the three, leaving his pinky out of the mix most of the time. And if you watch Eddie play, he uses his pinky only when he has to, when he needs to do the long stretch, and when he's doing some of the fancier pull-offs and legato. But I always was struck by Eddie's minimalism. You think that this guy is super complicated and blowing your ears out and your mind, but it's 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, with attack, with heart, and with incredible taste. But it's really Eddie Van Halen's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Right. He was able to that was the funny part about when I learned all his songs is because I do a tribute band to him and I play about twice a year. I do that, and I have to go back through the whole catalog again and kind of and learn everything all over. And what was weird about his style is that the way that he would pick it, like you said, it's kind of minimalistic on one hand. But for somebody who learned how I learned, it becomes very difficult to be his hand. Like you're trying to emulate him. And when you try to emulate him, there's something you're like, that shouldn't be that hard. I see it. I watch it and I go, that doesn't look that bad. But when it comes to executing some of these things, it's a lot more difficult than you would think because he just had such a unique approach to it. Like I could learn somebody else, I could learn George Lynch, say, a lot easier than I could learn Eddie. And it was just, sometimes it depends on what you have migrated through with all the different players you've migrated through, whether you picked up anything that applies to what he did. But he was sort of so outside of everybody else that's what made him special. But also when I try to play these songs, there's intricacies in them that people still don't get right today, which is really weird because I'll watch the one. I said this on my podcast a bunch of times for a while. I was like so obsessed with this idea that he played this one thing and nobody ever got it right. It's the last three notes of the solo on Running with the Devil. He does do do do, and in this it's a major third that he bends up, but he never moves his hand when he does it. He goes half step, whole step, or starts out on the note, half step up and whole step, but he never moves his hands. I never realized that until I saw him in a close up on Jimmy Kimmel, and I was like, his hand never moved, but the notes went up. What is that? And then as I went back through it to try to figure this out, I finally figured it out. But then I did a deep dive on everybody on the internet to see if anybody played it like Eddie Van Halen. You're right. The simple thing, right? It's really not that easy when you do it like he does it either, because you does it with the second and third finger. And I gotta say, man, most people did not play it right. I would say 95% of people, they maybe played the notes right, but not the way that he did it. So, like, it might be simple, but again, there's something about the way he would do things that was so weird.
Yeah, it was like he's channeling it from somewhere else. He's like an alien with the electric guitar doing his own thing.
Well, what's funny is he evolved. He evolved from this kind of blues player in Mammoth. A lot of people talk about how great it was, but he was like, channeling his Eric Clapton or his people would call supercharged blues or whatever, like a super fast blues, right? And then he made this transition in the late 70s to do this more linear classical thing, right? With the Ice Cream Man or these legato runs. He was almost a different player in late 77, 78. As that record came up, all of a sudden he makes this big transition in his playing. You can hear it in the bootlegs if you go out there and find some Van Halen from 74, 75, 76. You can hear how different a player he is until he hits 77. And all of a sudden, you hear the Van Halen we know. And he's making this transition through his playing style. And it's an amazing transition. And he becomes almost a totally different player than he was as a kid. And it was not like something went off in his brain that like, oh, I could do it like this, or what if I did this? It's just experimentation, and which was what he always did. But I just thought it was so fascinating to listen to how he progressed, and then how we all of a sudden in the last 6, 8 months before the record that Eddie Van Halen arrives. Had it been 75, we would have had a totally different guy.
Yeah, and experimentation is the key. Some guitar players, they'll get a technique. All right, I'm just going to use like Tom Morello, for example.
Okay.
I think he's awesome, Rage
Yeah.
Against the Machine. But Tom Morello does the, you know what I mean? The rhythmic kind of groove.
Yeah, that's
And
his
he
thing.
does it on almost every song. That's the signature Tom Morello kind of sound. Now, Eddie will think of a technique. Like in Somebody Get Me a Doctor, when he does the volume knob flourish, that big sound. He'll do it once, and that's it. In You Really Got Me, the Kinks cover, he's got the middle pickup that he's ripped out of the guitar, and then when he does the switch between the pickups, it cancels out. So as the solo grinds out, he does once. He never again did that. So another aspect of all the things we love about Eddie is he's experimenting. And once he does it once, he's like, I did it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to think of something new. I'm not going to like dedicate my entire style and career to a technique. And that's so phenomenal. The dude was always ahead of himself. Like Dancing in the Streets was that awesome kind of synth guitar rhythm. And he was pissed off that David Lee Roth wanted to do a remake of that song because Eddie had that riff reserved for a whole new song. And one of his complaints throughout Diver Down was, why are we doing so many covers? Like let's do original stuff. And this guy was a trailblazer. He never stopped tinkering and experimenting, and that is so badass. Which is he's never settled down to just being lazy. And again, no offense to Tom Morello, but like
we know that's what you do. I get you on that. Yeah, Eddie did that. I always think of the end of Beautiful Girls when he's playing that final thing where they're doing, oh yeah, Beautiful Girls. In between every phrase, he's doing a different lick, right? And when I would try to learn the licks in there, there's got to be like 30, and they're all different. Every one of them. There's a little thing he did on Pound Cake. He does it in there, and it's like you said, he would do like every lick was a totally different lick. And I know that he didn't remember what they were later. He just did them, and that was it. That's the genius of him. It's just like he never thought about it too much, so it just came out. Like you said, channeled through him or whatever.
Yeah. The alien. He was also a chromatic freako.
Oh yeah, he did that.
So in one interview, I remember he said, I don't know any scales, and I'm not going to sit there and learn scales because I don't have time for that. And now Yngwie doesn't read music either, which comes as a surprise to a lot of people. The trailblazer of neoclassical rock guitar does not read or write music. Yngwie is all with the ear and his fingers. Eddie similarly doesn't read or write music, never did. But Eddie was oddly chromatic to the point where Joe Satriani, when he's touring with Hagar to kind of resuscitate the Van Halen homage, had a lot of trouble, to your point, getting the Eddie down, because Satriani is very much locked in the groove. Satriani is a very precise player. Every note is exactly refined and always in key. And you play Ed, and I noodle around with Ed too, and a lot of the song structure and especially the leads are out of key. like the famous runs are like 1 1 2 4 1 2 4 1 2 4 symmetrically up the neck of the guitar, and it's
Yeah.
fun as hell to play. Like I'm the one, that
Fun.
awesome riff, and I'm the one. It's it's not in key. It looks cool,
It
and
works, and,
it
and that's
sounds
it sounds cool.
awesome.
Exactly. I think that's what it was. Like he said, if it was his okay, so his music teacher, okay, at Pasadena's community college, his name was Truman Fisher. Truman Fisher actually had,
I think Frank Zappa had the same
we
guy,
said
didn't
that we
he?
talked about that anyway, right? So I'm friends with his daughter, is Truman's daughter, and but he had this saying. He said, "If it sounds good, it is good," or something like that. That's what it was. And Eddie would always say this, right? That was his mantra almost. You almost thought it was from Eddie, but it was actually his music teacher. And but it really plays to how his mind would think about these parts. He wouldn't. I don't think he would think. I think he just they'd say that sounds cool, like we would. He just do it, and it didn't even really. There's things about him that I don't even think like. Even the guitar, or whatever he's talking about, striping the guitar, didn't really know what he thought about. There's rumors that he'd seen that somewhere or whatever. There's rumors that it was from a TV show, Outer Limits, I think it was.
Yeah, also bike. We striped our bicycle, our Schwinn bikes were striped like that. I did that as a kid,
Right,
actually. I'm a
right.
boomer Gen Xer, and I grew up in the 70s, and we striped our bikes with masking tape.
Right,
And
right.
that I think was an early origin of that.
Sure, could have been. There's a lot of stuff. Like one guy was on here was they were the Van Halens were always into cars, and the car culture apparently in the '70s out in California was a big thing. So there was a lot of that going on around them. So there was a lot of different influences around them. Like I was telling you about the hardware on there. There was surplus stores, of which there was one there in town that they would everybody would go to, the Army Navy surplus, and so they were always kind of being influenced by whatever was around, and they didn't have a lot of money, so they just made things work, right? And so they just got to this mindset where there wasn't any limit to what you could do. You just had to like he did, just mess around until you figure it out, whatever it was, whether it was the licks he was playing or how to put a guitar together and wire it, or he would just experiment, and it was everything he did was like that. His entire life was the craziest thing about him, how creative he was.
The Floyd Rose is another example of that. He didn't
Right.
invent the Floyd Rose, but he worked directly with Floyd Rose,
Yeah.
and he beta tested the Floyd Rose. This is the locking vibrato bar system where you lock the strings up at the top, right? And
Yeah.
then you lock them on the bottom, and you don't tune your guitar at the tuning forks, but you do it at the bass, right? At the bridge. And then you can
Right.
micro tune it, and the guitar doesn't go out of tune.
That's right. It's before that he was struggling with the like I showed you with the Strat tremolo. It didn't have a locking nut, and it would be difficult because that thing had to be. He would manipulate the bar in order to get it to stay or come back to tune. I was just with my luthier, and we were working on a guitar that I've mine that I'm in trouble with, and it wouldn't stay in tune. And he was showing me, he said, you gotta push it down and then pull it back up, and then it'll go back to tune. He was kind of showing me the way, and I said, well, Eddie used to do that. I know he used to do that in some of the things you hear in songs that he's doing. It's almost like I need to tune, so I'm gonna I'm gonna dive bomb here, and then I'm gonna do this, and it's gonna work. It's gonna come back in tune, and that was one of the things he used as it not only in the music but also to get the guitar back in tune.
Yeah, I mean, he struggled with that for years. And guitar players before then always struggled with guitars being in tune. Jimi Hendrix, that was a
Oh yeah,
reigning battle. And Eddie describes too how he would just like tune parts of the guitar, right? So when you dive bomb, it goes out, and then you just kind of hang on
Right.
to see what you could salvage from that, like the top
After
three
Floyd,
strings, right?
when he got to Floyd Rose, he realized, he could do these things that he wanted to do and come back to tune. So he stopped fighting with the guitar, and that might have changed his approach to certain things, and evolved his technique away from what we originally saw on the first record, as he guided that towards the second record with the first Floyds that were out there. Yeah, and then he became the master of that, and then it became like a thing where everybody was doing it, like all of the '80s guitar players became like Steve Vai pulling up, and Brad Gillis using it as a more manipulating the sound from tone to tone and note to note.
Yeah, and it's like you're not just dive bombing, but making it sharp too. And that's how Satriani gets his wailing Satriani sound, right? By doing the
Yeah, and
pinch
I think
harmonic and then
it's
pulling
so
up
fun,
on it.
dude. It's so fun to
Right.
do that. Those are one
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
most
Crazy
fun things
time.
to do. I just love playing with my tremolo horns. It's just woo! It's like the coolest thing ever,
Yeah.
especially with a locking nut on it, because it's just like you said, you come back in tune, and you don't have to sit there for about a half hour trying to get it back to where are in tune again. Made life easier, fun.
Absolutely. So the guitar, the drums, Eddie's unique gifts, Alex's groove. But, with the core Van Halen, you had David Lee Roth, obviously, and Michael Anthony. So
Yep.
when you're talking to people about the band, tell me a little bit about the feelings around what is arguably the greatest frontman in rock history. Now, David Lee is touring now, and he's
Hmm.
getting some, let's just say, mixed reactions about his voice and his showmanship. And I could just
And
give
his
David the benefit of the
yeah,
doubt.
it's
Is
leather
that
pants. It's all about leather pants.
the dude has been over the top from the beginning, so you get what you pay for at this point.
Right.
But tell me a little bit about what you've discovered from just the Minions having to do with the front man and the bass backbone of the band.
Everything you would think and more, right? So a lot of people say, I mean, there's been, well, on the show, but there's also been people in Greg's book who said that David Lee Roth had it in his mind he was going to be, a rock star when he was in his early teens, or even earlier. That he would tell people this, and they'd be like, "Yeah, whatever, Dave." And all the people around him while he was growing up, they all said he was pretty much exactly the same as today. Just obviously a kid, and it's he's just like as unique in what he does as Eddie did on the guitar, and that is the probably the thing that made them so crazily different, was that Roth was so much like Eddie in his innovative ways. I always think, how could you have actually written lyrics to something like Unchained? Such a unique musical piece that when you think to yourself, what would I sing over this? You'd be like, I don't know, man. I wouldn't know what to sing and what melody to work over it. But that guy could do it. He could come up with cool words, all those talking things between in songs, all the unique stuff he did. And it was all part of his brain, part of that showman, because he was always talking about his early influences, that were more Broadway than what, the Van Halens are, more hard rock. But he brought in that other vaudeville kind of thing, and it's like Alex and Eddie had that thing, like I said, and then you brought Roth in, and it's this other thing, but somehow they made it all work together. It was like, how could that work? How could that possibly work with their, how could that hard rock thing meld with Roth's old school Broadway-ish kind of vibe? And it did. That's what Van Halen became. Happy Trails is on Diver Down. I mean, these kind of like these nods. The whole Big Bad Bill. I mean, again, like Roth. there he is. That's Ross' thing, right? And in my thing, even though Eddie didn't really enjoy Diver Down, I mean everybody I talked to loved Diver Down. He's like the only one that didn't like it. But I mean it's great, man. I mean the first song, I mean when as soon as where all the good times gone comes in and he rolls the volume up like you talked about and it comes out like he just kicks you in the face. It's awesome. I don't know what he hated about it, but I think he just wanted to evolve, and I get it. But yeah, that was awesome.
Eddie used to mention that he doesn't even know the lyrics to most Van Halen songs. He just, plays, and then when he's got to do backing vocals, he'll do those, but he didn't really take them too seriously or care about it. But arguably, one of the differentiators between the early Roth years and the Hagar years is really the lyrics. So Hagar wrote kind of sappy love songs, which Eddie didn't mind because they were pop, and Eddie liked doing that. But Roth had the wild, kind of surreal lyrics that characterized the early years of the band in ways that added to its distinctiveness, as you mentioned. Like Light Up the Sky is one of my favorite Van Halen songs.
Oh.
With the zany lyrics and all the antics on stage. Crazy blonde hair, wearing chaps, his chest hair, doing the grind. He again was kind of like Robert Plant 2.0.
He was a good-looking dude when he was a young guy. I mean, the guy was. I mean, we see some of these pictures of him when he was in his 20s. You know why the girls liked him? He was a good-looking dude. I'm a dude, and I can say that confidently. Like that guy was. I mean, I would want to be him for sure.
The ultimate teen idol, fueling the fire. And then he had Michael Anthony. I always see Michael Anthony as kind of like the gravitational center of Van Halen. He had the two brothers, and then they were doing their own brotherly stuff. You had David Lee, this explosive energy, and then you had Michael Anthony, who was just like an even-keeled dude, pretty mellow, and he was kind of like the regular guy you'd sit next to in a bar and have a beer with. He was unassuming. He didn't have the looks of David Lee Roth. He didn't really have the musical talent of the brothers, but he was a solid bass player. He had great backing vocals with Ed. The signature Van Halen backing vocal sound was Eddie and Michael, right? And
that was a big deal, man.
He was kind of the cool bass player, kind of keeping the mix together. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think that Michael was. I wouldn't say held back by Eddie, but I think that he was trying to fit, and so Eddie was so busy, musically, that you gotta hold down the bottom end and be that guy. I know that he can play more detailed stuff and had over the years. That Ed would play some things the way they do, like Summer Nights when they do the tapping thing together, and he could do things. And it was just like I think that he really was just trying to be the team player, and he was. He always has been, and he is a unbelievably nice guy. I've met him a few times. And he is the guy you would sit at the bar with. And he really, that's his. It's funny that he's so likable and so nice with those guys. Like the whole energy of Eddie and Dave, they were like fire and ice together, like exploding everywhere. It was the thing they both recognized in the end that was what made them what they were. But it was difficult for them as a couple. I think what Musician Magazine had a thing one time. It literally said the odd couple on the front of it. And they had that such diametric personalities. I don't think that they ever really saw everything eye to eye, but somehow the music was perfect.
It's that mix, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. And
Absolutely.
then Michael's great personality is self-evident in his continued collaboration with so many musicians, right? Satriani, Hagar. That he just loves playing with people. He loves being in bands. He loves going out there playing. And if humbleness could be ascribed to a rock star, I think he would fit the bill on that, which is let's cut the bullshit, let's eliminate as much of the ego as we can, and then let's go out there and have a good time.
Yeah, and I think Hagar and him always saw that eye to eye. I mean, I've heard different things from different people. One of my friends toured with them in '95, and he actually recorded on Hagar's post Van Halen album, the one right after he left. And he just told me that Hagar was just the super nicest guy. And I've heard that a lot of times, different stories about people who are unsure about Hagar, and then they would meet him and they would get their minds changed. So he's either really a good salesman or he really is a really good dude. I think he's very emotional. I think sometimes that comes across in a weird way. And sometimes it pisses off the other side of the camp, I guess. But I don't know, man. He's just really likable. And that's a thing you see with singers, the ones that are great, they have a magnetic personality, and Roth had it, and Sammy had it, and so many great ones do. And it's unfortunately it's their personality is almost is part of the friction in a lot of bands, and it's weird because you wouldn't want it to be that way. You would want to be able to get along all the time and all that, but it's just almost not how it's made most of the time.
Hagar to me seems like the consummate hashtag winner. Wasn't his dad a wrestler, a fairly famous wrestler? He grows up in this entertainment family. He had a great career doing his own thing. And then when he came into Van Halen, everyone had their huge doubts. And as we were talking about earlier, 5150, the album, the song, the transformation, he took it to a whole new level. He kept it Van Halen, but it was Samified in ways where some of the diehard fans got pissed off, but almost everyone else was on board. He maintained a high quality all the way through Balance. And a lot of his gripes about what happened later, especially like the 2008 tour, to me seems to me a reasonable man and a good businessman expressing frustration with the breakdown of what was once a magical golden goose of a collaboration. And that might give us an opportunity we talked about the rise of Van Halen, and we talk about how they're so unique and distinctive, and how everyone, including us, two bald guys, keep talking about them. And you've dedicated a big chunk of your life to chronicling it and getting testimonials. But I think it's meaningful to talk about what seemed to go wrong. It's almost like there was magic. Like the light switch got turned on, and then boom, Van Halen hit the scene. And just like you mentioned, even Eddie's playing had that quantum leap from 75 to 78. And then they were absolutely unstoppable, just unbelievable, until essentially Balance and the Balance tour. I think Balance is terrific songwriting. Eddie's playing went to yet another new level in tone, in songwriting, in technique. And he just seemed to be on fire for 20 years. And then almost overnight, you hear rumors, you see Eddie physically decline, you see the quality of his playing plummet. It's like Robin Williams once famously said that I woke up one morning and I wasn't funny anymore. And I kind of get the feeling that the same thing happened to Eddie, because he's been the creative dynamo behind the band. Right. It is a combination of all these other factors, but Van Halen is Eddie Van Halen's songwriting and musical power and drive. There's no doubt about it. And I'm curious what you think, knowing a hell of a lot more and talking to all these folks. What the hell happened? Because it's almost like Eddie woke up one morning. He's no longer writing good material. The quality of his playing got really uneven, and his own his own attitude toward live performance. I saw them in 1984. I saw them for Balance. Eddie did not miss a note. And even when he's improvising and he's like doing back bends and yoga and he's flying and jumping and he's on point. And if you look at the performances really after the Balance tour, not only were they uneven, but Ed just seems to have gotten off the rails. So, and again, I don't mean to accentuate the negative, but I think it's important to talk about how genius was there and then something happened. What do you think about that?
You know how genius is. I mean, it's you know, a lot of people in the business they have OCD. They're very obsessive compulsive to start with, and that's what makes you great. You know, I had trouble with it myself, and what makes it great is you can really focus hard. You can really get on something and drive. Right, you have a drive, but that same quality can throw you off the rails down the road. And I think that he did I think he got to 98. After all this stuff happened with grunge, and they made it through all that, and then this. The stories are that Ed was, like you said, always to drive, and people change. Their lives change, and he was always wanting to work constantly. Like I said, probably OCD, right? Probably very obsessive, and not everybody's that way. And that kind of like to me is the crutch of what happened with all of his relationships is that he just all he ever wanted to do is right. And other people like Sammy, that you know probably this story, but basically he met his current wife around that period, and you know how it is. It's like he has to pay attention to his children and his wife and all of that, and he felt like he should, and right, he should probably right. But Eddie always wanted to work, so there was this constant thing like you're not doing enough, and you're not focused and whatever. It was two sides of a story all the time, right? So that kind of a breakdown between them. And then he went to Sharon in '98, and that record wasn't well received. And I think that might have broke his heart, man. I think that the first time that he didn't succeed, which all these years he had just crushed it. And I think that you got to the top of a mountain and you're eventually going to have a tumble at some point. And that's just going to happen, right? It happens to everybody. It happens to every musician. Now, sometimes when they tumble, they don't come out so well on the other side of that. And it took him a long time to come off, to recover. And of course that led down all kinds of dark paths, for him. I just think that like, when you get that kind of fame and that kind of notoriety, you can't go anywhere. You get very isolated, and we see that over and over with people that don't make it. They end up very isolated, and I don't think that's it's such a double-edged sword to be known. On one hand, he's trying to. The way I looked at it all the time, and you could read through a lot of books anyway about his experience coming into the business in '78 and how intense it was, and then how he kind of like, whoa, what did I do? Almost, like be careful what you wish for, and it just becomes this monster, right? It's so much so that he would call most people call him Eddie, right? And you may or may not know this, but he doesn't prefer the Eddie. It's Ed or Edward. And whenever he would, I've heard this, I don't know if I heard it from him or from somebody around him, but he would refer to himself as Eddie in only certain situations. And he was like separating himself from the person, the icon, because I don't think he ever felt like that was who he was. He's just some dude playing with his guitar, right? Having fun, right? But somewhere along the line, the fun stopped.
Right.
And maybe it was the relationship with Roth, and then the thing that happened with Hagar, and maybe that isolate. I think almost, Mookie, when I think about it, if I think about the isolation part, I think he just wanted somebody there with him when he worked. Not that they were going to do anything particular, like he would say that he would want Michael there to contribute, and then he'd complain about it, but then he would never use any of Michael's ideas, and that that goes. It's one of those push and pulls, and I think that Ed, I think he just really wanted someone there with him because he was isolated, and he wanted that.
That's a charming take on it, and I think there's tons of truth to that. Is you feel this sense of loneliness and alienation. I was in LA living in Fullerton, California, and I remember turning on the radio, and the DJs were just like so thrilled by this. This was about 2004, 2005, 2004, 5. They got Eddie. Eddie called in.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember.
And he's drinking and he's sitting with the guitar and they're asking him, "Hey Ed, how's it going?" And he was in a bad mood. He was like criticizing everybody, his fans. He said, "I just wrote a song about, the emptiness of Hollywood, and then he's riffing a little bit. And then he talks about his different favorite wines and how he prefers the cabs over the fruities. And I just got the feeling of sadness. And to your exact point, loneliness and isolation. It was like the mad genius in the tower. And he was just really pissed out. He was going through the divorce and all that. And he was just sad. I got the feeling that Ed was sad. And I think that that's a big, big part of it. I think another part also might be like, I call it the Bobby Fischer syndrome. Bobby Fischer, the chess player. OCD, exactly like what you mentioned, Jeff. Obsession. Bobby Fischer was chess 24/7. He's playing chess when he's dreaming that mofo. And he was a grandmaster at like age 13, right? So his brain is just cooking constantly. And then he snapped. Bobby Fischer went nuts. And I almost feel like all that OCD focus burns you out. And Eddie, as you know, he locked himself in a room. He played guitar for 8, 12 hours, sometimes a day.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie just acknowledged, even in his early interviews, that he jams all day long, and all of these factors might have just caught up to him: the loneliness and isolation of fame, personal issues, band issues, and then just burnout. Like his brain was like, "You've played too many notes, Ed. You got to chill out."
My own personal experience with that whole thing, you don't feel like it's a negative when you're doing it. You think, I'm doing good. I'm working hard. I'm putting in the hours. I'm accomplishing stuff, right? You're getting stuff done. And then one day you wake up and you go, but I don't feel so good. And you don't know what it is. And then, if you're partaking in other things, then that's going to make it worse. And then you just, all of a sudden you go, how did I get here? And why am I here? And why am I in such a mess? And it sneaks up on you. I think it's one of those things, like it does come off. It does do very positive things for you when you're younger. As you're growing up and you're learning how to play guitar, gives you something to do, keeps you off the streets. Like, I believe he said that too. And really, his inspiration was also a way that I kept myself out of trouble as a young kid. So yeah, I think that there's a story about Joss Stone, the singer, female singer, who went up to his house, and she wrote this after he passed, or I think it was after he passed. Anyway, she was talking about going up there and going, let's go to the store. It's like 2 a.m. and he doesn't want to go. And the reason he doesn't want to go is because he's going to get bothered at the store. She's like, it's 2 a.m. You're not going to get bothered. Come on, let's go. So they go down the hill from the house down to Ralph's. And sure enough, a line starts to form at 2 a.m. at Ralph's. All right.
Hey, everybody, Eddie's here.
Right. 2 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah, Eddie's in the produce aisle.
So he ends up getting, hammered by all these people, and then they get back in the car, and she says he doesn't even say a thing. And I think at some point he says, "Did you see what I mean? I wasn't," or just try to make a point that exactly what happened. So, I mean, just from that one experience that she relayed, it's like a lot of the things I thought. It's like, yeah, what if you could never go anywhere without? I mean, the adulation and all that it's a double edged sword. It's like it's something that on his level, it's gotta be unbelievable. Like you know, in a band, sometimes I'll get noticed around town, or you might get noticed for your podcast. And it's kind of nice that people notice you. It's kind of cool. But imagine that like on a million times. And then
Right.
it's like, oh. And then everybody's got such expectations of you too. Like you got to be perfect, and you got to be the perfect rock star. And when you meet somebody, it has to be the perfect situation and perfect
Too
moment.
much of a good thing, right?
Right.
Madonna was in an elevator, I think, in Vegas. She relates this story, and she was wearing her Madonna camouflage. She had her hat, her boy hat, and she had
Mm-hmm.
like, a hoodie. But she was recognized anyway. She's in the elevator riding up one of the casinos. And then they were like, "Hey, that's Madonna." And then they start talking about her like she's a wax doll at the museum. And they're talking about her as she's standing there. And then one dude goes up and kind of looks at her and raises the cap, okay? And says, "Oh, she's not as pretty as her pictures, as her videos. She's
Right.
not a real person. She's like this avatar of that real person,
Right.
replicated billions of times in millions of people's heads." And then how does that person, that celebrity, feel about that
Right.
idea that you've been turned into a figment of everyone's imagination and expectation? And then what do
Right.
you think? How do you think about yourself? To your point, is like he's a Pasadena kid, Dutch dad, Indonesian mom. They're poor. He's riding his bicycle. He's playing Black Sabbath songs. And the next thing he knows, he's world famous. And
Yeah.
everyone's got expectations.
Yeah, it's like, you go from obviously as he's coming up in the band, people know who he is in town. He's a little used to the idea that somebody's going to know who he is or recognize him or want to talk to him. But now it goes from, you know, I don't know how he would have taken that. He was probably most of the people that I talked to said he was fine with talking to you back in the early days, that it was something that he didn't have a problem with. But now it's everywhere you go all the time, no matter what. And then you got to be the perfect host, and you got to be everything they ever wanted you to be, right? And oddly, he was everything I ever wanted him to be when I met him, which was a really weird experience because I didn't know what I was going to get. I didn't even know I was going to meet him. But I hope that if I did one day, it was going to be this moment where I could just relay my feelings to how much he did for me and make that known without being weird. That would be a weird thing, right? And that he would be accepting of that moment and I don't know, really appreciate it's the right word, but would be able to handle that that comment. Like all I said was, I've been waiting 30 years to meet you, and thank you so much for what you did for me. And all I mean by that is that he put me on a path of doing something I really enjoyed and loved in my life, and I think he did too. And that was all that I wanted to say is like, thanks for that. Because that changed my entire. So, on the one hand, it can be such a burden for those people. But on the other hand, what they do for people and how they inspire us to go on in our lives and do whatever it is we want to do. Like everybody, we had somebody on, we had Paul Riario from Guitar World magazine on here, and he would mention that everybody in the business really owed him a debt of gratitude because the business behind the wake of his impact created this whole thing that gave other people work, jobs, industry. it was such an impact that he never even meant to happen. But I mean, I know he wanted to be successful, but he didn't think of that. I'm sure, like, I'm going to change industries, and he wasn't like doing that. I didn't think that was his thing, but that's what happened, and it changed so many people's lives. I mean, everybody that comes on my podcast, you and everybody else that's out there that I meet, it's like that we all kind of hit the inspiration of that light that he's shown out into the world that just blasted us all. Whatever that was, man. I mean, he always would say it was being downloaded to him or whatever, being channeled through him. And maybe it was. That was the point. Maybe that was the point of his life, was to send so many of us on our own little journeys that are, could be related or not related to what he did. But it's the idea that you have the freedom to create your destiny or your outcome, and it can be just like as simple as going to the hardware store and slapping something in some wood, or painting a guitar. This is one thing I learned when I did that guitar behind me, was that when I went out and I sanded that wood and I did that, every step of that, there was a calm and almost a meditation that happened with it. Because you had to be in it. You couldn't look at your phone and do this. You had to actually use the sandpaper and rub and rub and rub, And so this is a thing where, like, all of a sudden you realize, yeah, at that time and that point in time, it's sort of a meditative thing for some people to do art, right? Playing guitar's that way when you're by yourself. It's meditative. You're kind of like in your own world, and the time goes by, and you go, wow, where did it all go by? It's an amazing thing, and I think that Eddie just taught me, so many things that he didn't even intend to, and everybody else, by his own search and his own, exploration and experimentation. And I think, it's like he figured out a way, man.
I could totally relate. Ever since high school, Ed was the man, and I used to hang out with a band, Stonehenge. They were playing in my buddy's basement. He was a drummer. They played, Richie Blackmore, and Ed was the guy making it. He was only a few years older than us, trailblazing, and what he was doing was so exciting and inspirational, and just showed you what some kid with a block of wood with strings on it could bring to the world. And that's probably the biggest shining light of the whole VH scene, which is you're an emigre kid, you're a stranger in a strange land, and your mom is a hard ass on you, and your dad's got his issues, and you and your brother just make music and you change the world. Surprise, surprise, surprise. What was it like actually meeting him? You showed me the selfie that you took, and both of you look, you're like this, and then and Ed is cool. Ed looked cool. He was like chill.
What was funny about it was like I said to you, like, you have this, like, God, I hope it goes well, because the last thing you want is to meet your hero and not go well. And it was everything that I expected. Like, he was just the vibe that day, and the way he was feeling that day. I think about what had happened there that day. He was in the best possible moment and place. And I had almost met him before, and I missed that opportunity. And had I met him any other time, it probably wouldn't have been as great. But this was one of those moments where an institution like the Smithsonian, honoring him, and all those people, we were all flying in from all over the country to have this opportunity, which we didn't know was going to happen, because they did not say you were going to meet him. We just wanted to be at this event. And if we happen to meet him, well, good. That'd be cool. And at the end, they announced, they didn't even tell us until the end that we were going to be able to meet him. And then they said, you can meet, he's going to be out in the, foyer meeting you all. So they formed a line, like a, greeting line. And they were going to sit him down at a table, and they decided not to do that. And I thought that was cool that they didn't, because it was more personal because you could put your arm around him and put your arms around him, give him a hug. People were giving him hugs, and some women were crying when they went up to him because they were just so in love with him.
Wasn't there an interview portion though? I know that there was the Smithsonian event, and the Smithsonian event was dedicated to the immigrant experience, if I remember. And Eddie, as we've been mentioning, is an immigrant. They were both born in the Netherlands. Eddie wasn't born here. He's kind of an anchor baby with Alex, right? So
well, they actually talked in the interview. There's an interview on that. If you haven't seen it and you don't know about it, there's a Eddie Van Halen at the Smithsonian interview. It's about an hour long or so, or maybe a little less.
Was this the event you were at, or this is a different one? That was the event.
Yeah, and it was like it was actually free to get in. You just had to get the tickets. And so I found out about it online, and immediately was trying to figure out how to get tickets. Right. So after a half hour of digging, I finally figured out where to go to get it. I get there, I get 2 tickets. They're free. I just got to go to DC, right? So I got.
Isn't that mind blowing? It's like, there's this event at the Smithsonian on the immigrant experience, and Eddie Van Halen is going to tell you his story. Free.
Yeah.
Come on over, everybody.
It was amazing. So there we go. I get on a plane. Well, actually, before I went, I get the free tickets, but then close to the time to go, or maybe right before then, I get a message saying, we don't have a ticket for you. Sorry. We were whatever. It was like they couldn't do it. And I was like, oh my God, I just bought a plane ticket. Anyway, they come back and they say, oh, we're wrong. And I was like, oh my God, y'all are killing me. So anyway, get there and then get to see that awesome interview with him. And, the love in the air, man. Wolfgang was there. Alex was there. All of his journalist friends and family were there. It was about maybe 300 people. And when we got in the room, this was the most amazing part, was I was near the front of the line. So I got there really early. And when we walked in the room, half of it was already full. So half of it was journalists and friends and family. I had no idea how many people were going to go in because where I was standing, I couldn't see the line behind me. So I realized after the doors opened that maybe only 150 people from the general public got to go that weren't friends and family. And I happened to be one of those lucky people that somehow pulled it off.
They knew VH Stories was on the way.
I'm here to finally meet him.
Jeff Goebel, represent.
It's time to meet. Yeah, it was amazing, man, because he, his face is so inviting and friendly, right? That smile, like you saw.
He's always had that whimsical look. Like he's not quite sure exactly what the hell's going on, but he's having a pretty good time. And if you feel like it, join me because I'm going to jam. It's always that and he had the catfish face, right? Which is like
his face transmitted such enjoyment with the guitar, because that's, I think, what it was watching Don Kirshner's rock concert. I watched him and I thought, that guy looks like he's having so much fun, and damn, that is freaking cool. I want to do that. That's what it was, Had he been like, Solon or whatever, or like looking, it wouldn't have done anything for me. I would have not even bothered guitar. Well, I wouldn't have made the connection that this is the most awesome instrument in the world, and the most awesome thing I could ever try to do. And, I got to do some of those things, but every day that I get to do what I love to do, which is play guitar, which I'll be doing later tonight, every night the rest of the week, it's way better than working a day job. I did that for a long time, and it wasn't my love, and I needed to be doing what I love to do. No matter how big a pay cut it was, I needed to be doing what I loved. There's just no, if I got one thing from Eddie Van Halen, it's that you need to follow your passion and do that. There's a lot of people, I don't know where this came from exactly, but there's obviously the one that everybody says, which is, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, right? But there's another saying about it that if you do what you love, you'll put more time and effort into it and be more successful at it. Because you love it so much, you're going to make the extra. Like it's like playing guitar, right? Learning how to play guitar is really hard, and being good at it is super hard. It's not something very few people. I mean, I would say less people than singers are that they come to a guitar and are able to play it, because guitar is a physical thing. It's not a born in your lungs thing. It's not a natural. So even if you have natural ability and you might take you less time than the average person, you still have to put in some time. It's not like you're going to be able to immediately do that. So that time that you put in, it's so important to love it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to. So you almost immediately, as a guitar player, have to learn this whole story of, if you love it, you will make it to the end of this journey with your guitar. And then when you go on stage and you deliver that and you follow through and you finally made it to do your thing in front of a crowd, that is like the payoff, man. It's like I always say that we're always searching for that moment where it's almost like you're in the zone, right? It's like basketball or something. It's like when you're playing a sport, you get really great at that sport, and you're either going to hit the home run, or you're going to make that 3-pointer, or whatever. It's magic when it happens, right? And it when you did it. That thing happens so rare, it shouldn't be happening. And when you have certain shows that get to that level, it's such rocket fuel for the rest of your life, for the rest of your shows. So if you have crappy shows for a year, but you have 2 that get you to that next level, that you're still going to get enough juice to keep going. And it's like guitar. If you can learn that song and you get that satisfaction of doing something you thought, wow, how did I do this? You just keep on going. I just saw a podcast where this guy was doing it's kind of a self-help thing, but what it was is he was basically saying, do something that you would never think you could pull off or do. And this guy didn't even play piano. And what he did is he taught himself a classical level piece in 1 year. And all he did was all year. And he's not even a piano player. But at the end of the year, he had it down. And he performed it for this guy. And I thought that was really cool. Like, you made a goal and you know what it took to get there, which was a lot of work. But at the end, you had something to show for it. All musicians are like, they say, making stuff out of thin air. It's kind of like, when you come into the studio like here and I start working on something, I won't have anything. I'll have like, oh, maybe I feel like playing today. And then when I get done, there's this thing that I didn't have. And I made it, and that's because I learned to play guitar and made all these little steps along the way to get there. It's very gratifying. And it's like, I guess, any kind of art where you make something or you build a house or mow your yard. When you mow your yard, if even if you hate it, when you get done, you go, look how great my yard looks.
They say that talent is a mixture of appetite and aptitude. So you got aptitude, you got some talent, and to your point, you love doing it, you're good at it, but you need an appetite. You gotta be hungry for it and do it. And
yes.
Ed exemplified that in a huge way, which is he clearly had aptitude, but that appetite shines. Like, just like you mentioned, you see him on the TV show and you're not looking at the playing, you're seeing his attitude, his appetite beaming. And that is the most inspirational thing, because you can apply it to everything in your life. And I love what you said, that doing what you love is important, because then you're going to do more of it. And you will eventually be successful at it one way or another. And if you're not doing it, the opportunity costs are huge, because every hour you're punching that clock and doing a job you hate is an hour that you're not doing what you love and getting better at it. So you're closing in your world, and there's a huge price to be paid. And it's an even bigger price than maybe taking a hit to do what you love, because you're denying yourself the opportunity and at least the potential of living the life that you dream about. You're
Right.
creating a box for yourself and living in there.
Yeah, Mookie, had I not seen Eddie Van Halen, I don't know if I'd ever discovered that. You know what I mean? I may have just did like my father did, which wasn't a bad thing, to go out and work for your family and provide a great life, for me. I grew up very middle class, very well taken care of, and I had great parents. But one thing that I, you know, didn't like, my father grew up in a totally different way. He was a farmer. He grew up with very little. So when he had something and was able to travel with work, that was his payoff. That was the thing he loved, right? He had this payoff. And for me, growing up the way I did, that wasn't the payoff. So I had to find another payoff that was going to give me the inspiration to chase something. And that's what Eddie Van Halen did. It just opened my mind to, like, oh, you could do something you love. I could do guitar and wear weird clothes and blow stuff up and play guitar like a maniac and jump around, and I could get paid for that.
You don't need any real qualifications. So Eddie
Right.
had very little money, limited education, and he had a completely DIY approach, do it yourself. I don't really like the feel of a Gibson, but I like the sound. So I'm just going to rip the neck off and put a Fender neck on this so I get that raw kind of feel and some resistance from the guitar. And I got my humbuckers. And I don't really like how that amp feels, so I'm going to try a different one. And my strings are out of tune, so I'm going to experiment with this new gizmo to keep the strings locked and the guitar in tune. And I made that one effect and I'm bored with it. I already did it. I'm going to do something new. You just keep it fresh. You keep it moving. You keep experimenting and you take risks. Like I
Right.
remember seeing that high school band Stonehenge in my friend's basement, and they were playing loud and there was a knock on the door and it was the neighbors, and there were these old farts just like out of Family Guy coming in next door, and they go, "Can you keep that shit down?" And we're like, "Oh, okay." And they're like, "And oh, by the way, what you're doing is going to do nothing for you. You're going to amount to nothing. You guys are noisemakers. Go get a job." And I remember this old guy just saying it. And I'm like, "You're not the best example for this kind of advice, because I could feel how much you hate what you do. And I could feel how jealous you are that these young guns are doing it their way. And you'll do anything it takes just to squash them before they could even try, because you yourself have given up."
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, luckily my parents, I mean, they were cautiously like, uh, they would say things to me, like one time. This is a crazy story. All right, so basically, once a week I play at a Holiday Inn, right? I play a once a week house gig, so I play acoustic on Wednesday nights. And my parents, when I was in my 20s, they were like, they knew they had a family friend, and their son was a musician, and he ended up being very unhappy because he didn't make it or whatever. And then he ended up working in a Holiday Inn. And so they would always relay the story to me like, "You don't want to end up working in a Holiday Inn, do you?" or whatever. And I looked at my parents. I said, "There are worse things I could be doing than playing guitar." You right? And they like, all of a sudden they started thinking about my friends and their bad habits and how they didn't have anything going on. And "You're right, son. You're right. You're right." And they were like, "Don't be so obsessed with the guitar. You got to branch out." you know, it was so hilarious to me because I had to break. It's like, you at some point you have to pick a lane and go for it, right? And I went into the corporate world, doing what my dad did in sales. But 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, I'm like, this is, I enjoy the money, of course, but I never have time to spend it. And, I don't enjoy this. And why am I doing this? And it just worked out. And eventually I had enough going on that I could go full time with enough different things I had in the fire. But I thought it was funny that my parents had always said that, and then later I ended up doing it, and yet I love it. Like, yeah, I actually enjoy that because it's a very regular work that I love to do. It keeps my chops up during the week. I always play. I'm always playing, and I'm never stopping. And to me, it's like working out for some people that are big into that. It's a way to make sure that I'm going to maintain my skill, and I get paid for it. So it's a double win, right?
What could go wrong, right? It's
Right.
it's it's doing what you love. And you're going to get heat for it, whether it's your accountant or the tax man. But I would rather get heat from those people than my own conscience, which knows that if I don't do what I love, I'm going to drop dead without having fulfilled any of my dreams. So what's the price of that? That's the
That's a good.
highest price of all.
I can't even fathom the idea of doing something I don't. After I got back to what I love, which I had taken that 15-year period in the corporate world, it taught me some things about business, and which is good. A lot of things that have translated for me professionally into this business, back into the business. Uh, if I had to do it all over, I'd probably do it like I did, but because of the benefits of the other job. But again, when I rediscovered it, I was kind of like, wow, I didn't really know that I could do it until I really just put my everything into it. You know what I mean? And it ain't easy, man. It ain't easy. It's not easy financially. It's very tough.
For about 20 years, I did the corporate thing too, heavy. I had two
Yeah.
kids, then we adopted my wife at the time's niece. So I had
Mm.
technically three kids, and I had a sense of responsibility that I had to care for them. I had to give them a safe and stable and secure and frankly spoiled upbringing. But it got to the point where my older one became a Marine. My younger one is now doing his own thing. So I'm kind of off the hook. And with that comes me being a kid again. So, I'm skirting financial responsibility to do podcasts, meet fascinating people like you. I'm hanging up the shingle for doing writing, publishing, blogging, and it's a passion that I've had forever. And also jamming. And it's relatively late in life, but if not now, when? And now I feel I got runway for it. And
Well,
if I
yeah.
blow up the bank and rip through all my retirement savings and have the tax man knocking at my door, like I'm mentioning, that's a small price to pay for spending the quality time doing what I really, really enjoy doing. And I met you coming off the Pasadena Comic Con, where I
I
was
know.
barking my own science fiction novel that I wrote,
Yeah.
and it was fun meeting people and hanging out. And I was with my kid, and we're like, Eddie and Alex's house is only 5 minutes away from the Pasadena Convention Center. Let's go check them out. So we pull up, and you're already there. And if it would have been 10 minutes in either direction, we got there earlier or later, you and I would have missed each other. But I think the essence of the point you're making, Jeff, which is just so on point, is that opportunity is not going to come your way. You got to take it, and you got to be willing to pay for it. And it's bountiful in terms of the benefits that you get with meeting cool people, being at the right place at the right time, and just going for it. Roll the dice and see what could happen. And I love how this ties into our earlier conversation. I began this whole pod by asking you what makes Van Halen so special. And we talked about the brothers and the dynamic and how they grew up. And I think you're really hitting that point right now, which is, I think we kind of found it going through this whole process, which is what makes Van Halen so special, is that excitement and willingness to just go for it
Yeah.
and
Ross said
doing
that.
it.
Ross said that. He said that in that video that I watched. Now, I don't know that I was thinking like what he was saying was people complaining, but they just need to go. He said something like they just need to go for it. Take a chance. He was subscribing to a couple different people, his approach, positive thinking, right? Just general. And that's something Roth always talked about. And I guess maybe I picked that up a little bit from Roth and the idea of it, but it became real in my life later. And you were talking about meeting people, right? Us meeting, it's true. Like if you don't go out there and give it a shot, you're gonna miss it all. You're missing it all. Like I would have missed you, like you said. And dude, this. If you go out to Comic-Con or wherever, the amount of connections and relationships and new moments with people that you get, it's rewarding, even if it's just for a moment and that's it. With my podcast, that's one of the best unthought of things for me was that the joy that I get talking to new people about a subject I of course love. Yeah. But also, I get to know them a little bit through the podcast. I did the last one, Wiley Adams from Pasadena. And he was a firefighter that grew up with them. They played at his wedding reception. And, I get to learn about Pasadena in the old days. I get to learn about their lives growing up there, what was going on in California at that point. So there's a lot of incremental things that I learned around the Van Halen story that are wonderful anecdotes to what I never expected to learn. I didn't think I was going to be learning these things. You know what I'm saying? So had I not, jumped down this rabbit hole, I would have missed. Gosh, can't even tell you how many cool new friends I have.
Badass, and it's a network of cool people by default because we're all members of the same tribe. So I think we're all attracted to that Van Halen energy, which is risk taking, talent, There's a zany element. There's like the woo. It's like the Hot for Teacher video, and when Eddie's suspended from that bungee cord or whatever, and he's just kind of flying across the stage.
We all want to do it. We all want to get on that thing.
Yeah, and and then it all hits us here. So we're all brothers and sisters in this Van Halen zeitgeist, and it's just damn cool. And you're kind of the ringleader of this aspect to it, which is badass in its own way. And I gotta ask you, you have an archive building up of testimonials of people who knew the brothers, who knew the band. Yeah. And we're getting older. There's gonna come a time where there's gotta be a Van Halen vault. where this shit is saved for posterity, right? Because it's not about just reading a magazine interview or whatever, coming through all that old school media, but you are getting firsthand accounts of musicians, technicians, neighbors, friends, family. And I think that's deeply meaningful as kind of a chronicling of this phenomenon.
Yeah, it's crazy, this story of how this happened. I mean, I got to say, I always laugh about this because my wife has always given me such a hard time about my obsession with Van Halen. It's kind of like my obsession with guitars, right? She just like loathes it almost. And so she would always hold her hand up and go, "This is you." She goes, "You're obsessed with Eddie Van Halen. You're obsessed." And this is, when we met 20 years ago. And so every time I remind her now about my Van Halen Stories podcast, and like, well, look how it turned out. See, I had the vision of doing this. This was my love, my passion, and look what happened. People I'm putting this archive together that nobody else is putting together. Well, some people are, but I'm one of the people doing it, and I want it to be there for anybody to access. It's free. You're getting access to people that I wouldn't have had access to had I not gone out and met Greg Renoff and done all those things. Had I not just been interested, just obsessed, had that not been a thing, I wouldn't be talking to you. We would have never met. along with the other 58 people that have been on my podcast, and the rest of these people that will be on it in the future. You know, somebody asked me a few weeks ago, when you get to 100, what are you going to do? And I was like, quit. And they're like, what? I said, well, I only really planned on doing 100. I said, but you know what? If I feel like I should keep going, I'll go more than 100.
You can at least go to 5150.
5150, right? Oh my God. Yeah, I'll be 90. But I do think it's important. You know, the Van Halen family, my sense was, and what they would say often in press, was that they didn't want to toot their own horn, so to speak, like in the way that we fans want them to. You know what I mean? We would want to see that tribute show, that Freddie Mercury type tribute for Eddie Van Halen or whatever. But that's not going to happen, because I don't think that's who they were or what they would want.
And they got conflicts, you know, David's ego.
Of course, all the other things that go with it, right? So it just so happens that there's a guy out there who has enough passion in his heart for Van Halen that he's willing to go out and interview people for at least 100 episodes, and you know, 3, sometimes 4-hour episodes. So the amount of hours that is going to be left in that archive, it's, you know, you and I have grown up in this situation where podcast has become the thing, right? I didn't really, when I started, it was kind of an infancy, and Joe Rogan, for example, was kind of a small thing. Yet I kind of like saw what he was doing and thought, this is great information because it's long form. In a book, I would have to edit this. I would have to go pick out the best parts, right? I don't have to do that. I mean, I can edit some, but generally I try to keep the stories as unedited as I can and let people tell their whole story, every little detail. And sometimes even their personal stories are fascinating. And the history that they relay is not always Van Halen. It's more about Pasadena, or maybe what they ended up doing because of Van Halen and their path. And that adds a dimension to the podcast that I think is different than a book. You know, something
there are
that
people talking. When you read a book, it's just text. It's like getting a text either from your girlfriend or your biggest enemy. It's just words on your phone. But when you see people animated and engaged, you feel their energy. And that's what I mean is you've got this unique archive building of firsthand testimonials, passionate accounts. To your great point, it's the things that were happening around the band and through the band that make it relevant within the band in ways that nobody else is doing. Are you in touch with the family at all? I mean, like Wolfgang is the one out there right now keeping the tradition alive. And you got to give that guy huge points, which is he's doing his own thing. He's taking some heat, right, for being Eddie Jr., but I think he's a nice guy. He's sincere. He's very talented. Dude plays Dude grew up in the studio, right, with Ed blowing his left eardrum out. And he's adding a lot to the genre in his own way. And I'm assuming that he'd be vested in capturing this lore through all these people you're talking to.
Yeah, I think, I have reached out to Wolfgang through his PR people, and so far they haven't wanted to go in the historical direction or talk to me about that kind of thing at this moment. I think that Wolfgang, he's very close with his father, and so the grieving thing was, at first especially, I think he's getting better with it, and I think that there may become a time. I've offered to just do PR for them. Like, I love what he does. I'm a big fan, and I've met him before. He was super nice, and he did have this was before his father passed, though. He did have a very good sense of the history and loved the history. He did a recent video on Drumeo, the Drumeo channel, where they reviewed drum parts from Alex, and he would play the parts, and then he would kind of react to what he was seeing. So I hope at one point, I can have him. I think that my thing is that I'm so personal about his father that he may be not ready for that. You know, I'm
Yeah, he
not.
might be a little weirded out.
You start thinking, what kind of questions would I ask Wolfgang? Uh, you know, I think that initially I would like to ask him about himself and his upbringing, maybe some more details that people don't ask him. Because it's always bullet point things, and I think that there's a bit of reservation with people like that they want to make sure that what goes out there is what they want, which is fine. I edit everything, whatever they want. But I think that I have an emotional connection, like all fans do, to his father, and that's he was his father, so it's kind of weird for him, like your father and my father. If you were being interviewed about your father and it got real personal, it would be kind of weird for you, right? Like, how do you?
Yeah, here Wolfgang's really different than Dweezil Zappa. Dweezil Zappa's on Rick Beato. Dweezil's all over the place, just talking about Frank all the time. And as we know, Dweezil's made a career of playing Frank's music.
Right.
So Dweezil's a whole different ball of wax from
Yeah,
Wolfgang.
yeah.
It's
And
a completely different breed,
I,
right?
I asked Dweezil that question. I said, "What?" I asked him this question about himself, his father, and Wolfgang and his dad. And Dweezil was kind of like thought the same thing I did. Like for him, it came through a good period of time before Dweezil went there. With his father's music. And I think that'll be a similar thing with Wolfgang. I think that he wants to build his own career, have his own thing. I think at one point or another he will reconnect with his father's legacy, and I don't know what he will do with it. I don't know that he will play his music in any like live. He has, here and there, but not like any shows or anything like that.
No, I don't see Wolfgang doing what Dweezil's doing at all.
No,
It's a whole different kind of
yeah, it's a different.
ethos there. And Dweezil had kind of a shitty relationship with Frank. To me, that's what's ironic about Dweezil. Like, Dweezil's mom said that Frank doesn't do love very well. So Frank was in his studio drinking espresso, jamming on his Cherry Sunburst Les Paul and laying tracks. And he wasn't really too close
Yeah,
to the family.
when,
Whereas
when,
Eddie and Wolfgang seem to have had a nice
they,
father-son relationship. That's totally different.
yeah, they're totally different people. Emotionally, I think Eddie was so emotional and so. There's the book that Steve has out. Steve Rosen, who was one of his early interviewers, he almost did a biography on him. It never quite happened. Steve's got an audiobook out called the Tone Chaser audiobook. Now, this is like literally, I don't know how many hours this book is, the audiobook. It's hours and hours and hours of all the recorded conversations over 26 years. So you hear Eddie in the very beginning, you hear Eddie in the 90s, you hear him all through his life. And it's uncensored. Okay, so it's stuff that probably the family didn't want out there, to be honest with you. But it gives you a window into who he was and how he worked emotionally. And it's what you think. He was a very sensitive person. His son's that way, and it's beautiful in so many ways. I think that's why we connect with Eddie Van Halen, is because he felt so warm to us because of the face.
Eddie's very introverted in the classic sense. Eddie
Right,
did not like interviews. Eddie was not verbose, and Eddie
right.
never taught guitar. Like Ingwe is out there doing master classes and seminars, and Ingwe cannot shut the hell up. He's like and boasty and in everyone's face like all the time. And
Yeah, and
Eddie's the opposite of that. The
if you
exact
go,
opposite of that. Even in the
if,
videos, he's like off to the corner. In a lot of the music videos from MTV, Eddie's in a straitjacket, right? Eddie's the crazy one. Eddie's the one out to lunch. And it's not your classic rock star kind of attitude. And then that way, him and David complemented each other very well, which is like David is just in everyone's face, and Eddie's off to the side, just ripping it up. And I think that translates to what you're getting at, which is we like Eddie not only for his fearlessness and his innovation and his experimentalism, but for that deep kind of introverted heart where there's a genuineness to that and a deep shyness that underlies everything that he does.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is what it is. It's the genuineness of somebody, because there are moments, in stories about him that are amazing about that part of him. He obviously had his moments and troubles, but there are moments that I've heard and that people have told me that are just amazing, man. Like one of the guests was on. He had chased Van Halen in their limousine when he's 12 years old, right? Right, he's a kid, and he's got the Van Halen necklace on, and he's chasing Eddie Van Halen, and he gets to the window, and the window's up, but he shows Eddie Van Halen his necklace, and Eddie gives him the big thumbs up. Well, 30 or 40 years later, he's a studio owner, and it just so happens that he has some of the bootlegs that the Van Halens are trying to get together for that final album, and Eddie Van Halen calls up and comes down to his studio. And he has a one-on-one with him. And Craig, like me, and probably a lot of guitar players, grew up that introverted dude, just like Eddie Van Halen. So we bonded with him in a way because, like, we were him. We were him. He was us. I don't think that I knew Mookie at the time. I said this before. I didn't realize that Eddie Van Halen did exactly what I ended up doing, which is sit in my room and play forever. Because I didn't have the magazines or anything telling me that. That information wasn't there. I just thought he was Eddie Van Halen, a guy on TV. I didn't realize he went through the whole introverted thing that all of us go through. We're going to play in our room by ourselves. It's a very inward sets of years almost that happens to get to the point where you can play that. And we connected with him in a way that we didn't even know we were connecting with him. As you get older, you realize, oh, we were just like him, or he was just like, and somehow we knew that part of it through his the way that he transmitted things.
Absolutely. And I think that's where his alien powers came from. Because he was following a North Star that was inside of him instead of outside of him. Clearly he had his influences. Obviously, like, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, ZZ Top. He grew up playing these songs. But he channeled it through his own ideas. And that's a deeply introverted perspective as far as the art goes, which is it gets channeled through him and his voice. And the real definition of any genius in any modality, you could be a painter, a sculptor, an actor, is the second you see or hear them, it locks in. It is their unique voice. And more so than any guitar player we could think of, there is the EVH sound and style that comes out within a measure or two. You instantly know it's him, and it's unique, and it's been copied. Go to Instagram, scroll through, you got a million Eddie clones, but that core style came out of nowhere, but that nowhere is the depth of his heart. And I think we relate to that. And that's so inspirational.
Yeah, we feel it from him. I think that's what I said. When you watched his face, somehow you just knew you could feel his passion, like just by looking at him. And so when I met him, I walk up to him, and that's the face, man. That's him. That's the guy, right? And I hugged him. And it was like a surreal moment, like, wow, I made the journey all the way from my bedroom and this guy on my wall to hugging this guy and thanking him for what he did. And I'm sure he didn't really think about anything about it. But somehow, through the magic of music and the magic of his life, millions of people like you and I have learned to follow our passion in life and throw caution into the wind and give it a shot and go for it. It's amazing.
And feel gratitude along the way. Feel appreciation for those who help get us here, those who
Sure.
sustain us, and those for whom we do what we do. Because what's a musician like with no audience?
Right.
He was playing for others. He inspired us. He inspired millions of people and set an example that we live through. But it's really about what you give back, not what you take away.
Right. Right. And so every time, that inspiration hits us and I go back out into the world to do my little thing on acoustic guitar, wherever it is, or electric guitar, there's always a moment where a child comes up or a parent brings a kid up and the kid is fascinated. They want to know about it, right? They never even touched a guitar. And that's when I turn around and I give them a guitar pick and I let them hold it and I've done it with schools. I've gone to schools and done like little playing demos. And then at the end of the demo, I'll take the guitar and I'll just hand it to them. Say, here you go. And they will play with the whammy bar and they'll look at it very closely. And I'll get messages back from the teacher going, so-and-so went home and wanted to become a guitar player. And I'm like, that's that not the thing? Like Eddie Van Halen did that for me. And now I did that for some other kid. And that kid is going to go through their life and hopefully find that passion and joy. And they won't have to live a life of not having the joy that we have. I mean, that is a powerful thing that I guess I never thought of when I was, when I was playing that guitar in the room. I wasn't really thinking. I was like him. I was just loving what I was doing. And but later in life, you realize, you know what? There's a reason I'm out here doing this, probably, and I got lucky. I got lucky, and however this happened, this is part of my path to go out and meet new people. If I can give a kid a moment with a guitar, or we can inspire them in some way with music, it's special, very special.
100%. They say that mediocrity can only recognize the mediocre, and that it takes talent to recognize genius. And I think part of our sensibility here is we're a little bit inside sports with our adoration. We play guitar. We learn the licks. We pinch that harmonic. We tap that arpeggio. We legato that on fire guitar solo. And we have an inside sports appreciation for that genius. I got my Wolfgang guitar and my Ernie Ball. Remember the Ernie Ball series that came out with the Music Man? And we appreciate his transformation of the instrument. We appreciate his musicianship, and we appreciate everything we're talking about in terms of that inspiration. But we also recognize that transcendent genius. And in ways, it's like the rising tide lifts our boat, which is we taste it. We want some of that. And we want it infused not only in our own playing, but in all of our lives, right? Like bring some of that genius into your life, not only as appreciation, but as application. Be bold, be innovative, be different, and think and do outside the box and have it come from here. Stop listening to other people. Stop taking advice and just follow your heart. And that's the surest way to not necessarily succeed, but at the very least get a sense of transcendent self-satisfaction and this idea that you're really realizing your potential.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's very an important a part of what I do is the whole Van Halen Stories podcast. As you mentioned, we recognize it. So even if only my small community recognizes it, it's important for me to do this. It's I just felt like like it needed to be archived. These stories and this entire picture. I was going to tell you this earlier, but there's there's your first person family view of the story, right? Their view. All right. So in your life, you have your view of your story, right? But there are people around you, and they know you. They know Jeff from this side of the room, right? Their version of my story is different than my version of my story. Is their story wrong? You know, I don't think so. I think their story is what they see, and my story is what I see. And all these perspectives add up to be a collage of a person's life. So whether they knew him super well or they just happened to run into him in a music store and they had an interaction with mom and him like the last guest, or he was there, they pulled him up, this last guest up on the stage during his wedding. I mean, these are things that people get a sense for what other people are like. One of my guests went to dinner for his birthday with his family, famous fashion designer. I get all these different aspects where people have interactions, moments, hours, days, decades with him or with Roth or with anybody in the band, Michael. And they leave it behind. This is their book on whatever that moment was. And so when you add all those up in context, I'm the one that's kind of taking them all in my brain right now. It's like, so when I think about you, when you say something to me about the story, I relate it to somebody else's telling of the story, and I retell the story that they told me as a answer to whatever you're asking me. And this multiple collage, I think of, Alex Van Halen might not see that way because it's his brother, right? I think he said something like Van Halenologist in his book. Well, and Noel Monk, their manager, like, you weren't there, you don't know anything about it. How do you tell history about the band when you were there? Look, there are people all around you all the time watching what you do. They know your history. Today with Facebook, all you gotta do is hit a button, you can see your history, or Instagram, right? So I just don't think that there's only one way to tell the story, and it doesn't always have to be from the family's point of view, because what's more important? I don't think the family view is important, no doubt, but also the inspirational view of what he did for us, how it affected us, is important because it changes the world around through his inspiration. We go out into the world and we befriend a kid or another person like you in the street in front of his home because of him. So I mean that's a story in itself. It's a story of him, but another story of him in a different context, in a different viewpoint. Not always firsthand, not always in the family, but I do think it's very important to have some reflect. Like I always say this: if I was to sit with Alex Van Halen, I would say, Alex Van Halen, why do I do what I do? Let me tell you why I do what I do. Your brother and your band. Let's just start with your brother. Your brother was the equivalent of Mozart of our era. If I could sit down with Mozart's friends, who are close friends to Mozart, and create a podcast about Mozart, would I not want to do that? Would you not want to watch that podcast of Mozart's friends talking about Mozart? Is their viewpoint not valid? They were there. If we had that opportunity, we would take it. So I mean, I'm sure that it feels funny to them. People do this, but to me,
it makes sense. It's a valuable contribution. What do you think of Alex's book?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was cool. It was great he filled in some holes, some things that I had actually gone out and learned through reading my buddy Greg's book. I mean, because I think there's some things that he uncovered that we had already kind of gone out. I'll do this thing called Van Halen Trail. I just did one.
I saw that. That's cool.
Okay. So I go out to all the sites of where Van Halen either went to school. I've been to their elementary schools. I've been to, all the houses that they've lived in, all around town where they played, music stores where they shopped, just about anywhere that they touched, I go and I
That's what I
document
mean.
that.
You are the fan. You are you are the Van Halen man of all fans.
My wife sitting there going, "Yeah, I know." So, so anyway, one of those places was 486 Oakland, which is where they immigrated to, the first house they immigrated to. Now, we had known that through documents that, city documents, right? From Greg, and people who lived in the area would go look it up in the records. But the Van Halens had never come out and said where that house was and what it was like. And nobody had, and Alex Van Halen didn't until his book came out. Yet I had been there already and filmed the Van Halen Trail and put it down as a documented spot. Greg had documented it before me by 5 or 6 years, maybe more. But we were basically doing some of these things that he actually uncovers in his book. Basically, finally says this is where it was, and we're like, "Well, I mean, we know the Van Halenologists know. I want to go find this guy.
We're gonna call you Dr. Van Halen.
Dr. Van Halen.
Doc
Well,
VH.
Well, I guess did I tell you that when I was with you the other day at their house that I was at their old immigration home. What I found out about that immigration home was that Einstein was born down the street. Not born down the street, sorry. Totally wrong. Einstein lived down the street from the Van Halen immigration home. He lived there in 31 when he was going to Caltech, or not going to Caltech. What am I saying? Was working at Caltech, right? When he came to the U.S. to work, he was at this house, and it's only walking distance from the Van Halen home. I never knew it. And then somebody put up a picture of it. And so I tied it into the Van Halen Trail this time. Like this is something
that's badass. It's like genius on genius.
It's like, yeah, right. It's another cool thing about the show, or about that in particular, is that when I go to a site like the Pasadena sites that Back to the Future were at, they're all intermixed. Gamble House over by the Rose Bowl was Doc Brown's house. The house where the Van Halen cassette goes in and they blast the guy's head, right? In Back to the Future, that is right in town too. So all these things are connected in a way that's really interesting. And I like to let people know about the other places in Pasadena that are fun to go and check out. Because there's a lot of history.
You're also humanizing it. Because, people oftentimes consider these celebrities, especially someone like Eddie, Alex, is so transcendent. Back to the Madonna in the elevator example that I was citing, where these people aren't even real. They're not like, they never like took a shit. They never expressed real emotion because they're all that. But I think what you're doing doesn't lower it. It heightens the incredibleness of the accomplishments because mere mortals have done all this, right?
Right. It's so cool though, right? It's the immigrant story is not a unique story, but it's like when Eddie Van Halen guested on Beat It, right? Would the song been as big? Probably. But whether it was big or not, it was a cultural shift, and like it brought together two worlds of music, and that was an important moment, right? And just like that, where you have all these different people coming to the United States, and you get these great moments where things happen, and the Van Halen story is such a great story, and then it ties through so many different cool stories. Like I said, the Beat It session, or any of the other things that Eddie was involved in, through Les Paul, who he was friends with. Les Paul's story is one of the great stories that's only been told once, really, by PBS. Wonderful documentary on Les Paul called Chasing Sound. I would recommend it highly. And I think that Eddie Van Halen was right there with Les Paul as far as being an innovator and a person of influence.
They were buddies too. They fist pumped, and yeah,
right. But see, the thing is that Eddie Van Halen has not been celebrated at all like that, and he should be. And so I'm doing what I can to celebrate him right now, while we all still here, and we can appreciate all these things. And when the Van Halens get around to doing whatever they're going to do, I'll be the first one in line to buy it up and enjoy it. There's a new book coming out. I'll plug Alex's newest book. It's a book of photos and like unreleased photos, unreleased stuff. It's made by the same publisher that did the Jimmy Page anthology book, which is a wonderful book with all his memorabilia in it. And Alex is doing a book like that. So I'm excited to see that. And that is a step in the direction that I think fans want. They want to, I always would say, where are the outfits? Where's the pants from 70? Why are these? I mean, I know we're all surf, some of them are rock, but where's the jump pants? Where's the jump outfit? Where's this stuff at? It's in a closet up there at their house. I know it.
Yeah, there needs to be like a VH museum. They did the David Bowie. They did the David Bowie museum tour with like the Ziggy Stardust outfit and all that. They used to do VH.
They should do it in Pasadena Civic. They should put it in the Pasadena Civic where you went. Have a big exposition. Have a big Van Halen fest, and everybody comes to Pasadena. It'd be great for the town. It'd be a great place to do it. I've been thinking about this forever, but I'm all the way across the country, and it's not so easy for me to do that from here.
Yeah, but I think you're doing the community, you're doing the brothers and David and Michael and Sammy and everyone. The band had, Don Landy, the producers, that, to your point, hundreds, thousands of people were involved in their success, and tens of millions of people benefited from it, whether it was getting laid after the show in high school or whether it was just following along, learning guitar inspired by the maestro, right? Buying a cool guitar that sounds like $1 million and has just the right feel and action to it. Dive bombing with the thing in tune. The MXR pedal has its own rebirth. The list goes on and on. The EVH gear that has gone through iterations, his partnership with Ernie Ball, PV, Fender, right? Eddie was fickle, not only with his singers, but with his companies that he licensed through. So, it's an interesting journey of gear, of talent, of fans, of inspiration, and you're the ringleader of a lot of this stuff from the point of view of the people who received all that benefit. That's great.
Yeah, and that's right. That's a good way to put it. That's what I would say. I'm just trying to let all of us who receive that benefit of their amazing journey celebrate it with each other. It would be like, I would love to have like a Van Halen, like the Kiss has Kiss convention where everybody gets together. I would love for that to happen, but in my particular situation, this is the best I can do. And it's a way to do it, and it's a way to put it around the world, and it's a way to let anybody from anywhere visit Pasadena, see these places, catch a few other things while they're at it. I always would laugh when my dad, I was growing up, and he would be telling us about cities when we'd go through, right? I said, Dad, you're a tour guide. Stop it. Here I am, the tour guide. What the hell?
Yeah, and and what's great is you're a really sympathetic, empathetic, inclusive curator. You're not like distorting the legacy. You don't really have an agenda. It's not like, it's the Jeff Goebel show and thanks for tuning in. And oh, by the way, we're going to talk about Van Halen. You're focused on your subject matter with reverence and respect. You're getting all sorts of points of view. And you're really accentuating all the positive aspects of the experience and everything we're getting out of it. And, I steered you in the direction of some of the problems with maybe Ed, with the band, with all that. And I just did that so we get a full picture of what happened and appreciate the good that came with the bad and understand what might have happened to something that was great and learn from that too. But you are just incredibly positive and uplifting. And, I saw you had a big smile on your face when we're standing on the lawn of the house. And your viewers can instantly sense that your only agenda is to do exactly what you're trying to do, which is just connect the community, spread the word, and share the joy and excitement. And that is, my friend, a very noble mission.
Thanks, man. That's all. It really is what I'm trying to do. I mean, when you watch my podcast, at the end of the podcast, there's a picture of me when I'm 13. If you look closely on my back wall, there's 3 photos of Eddie Van Halen on the wall. In that picture. I'm actually trying to change the strings on a guitar, but I don't know how to yet. So I'm using regular scissors to cut the strings because I don't have any clue what I'm doing. I can't even tune the thing yet. But my mother happened to catch that photo at at a moment where I was just getting the bug. And there was Edward Van Halen behind me the whole time.
Yeah. So there you go. You're going back to the beginning, which is the biggest lesson we all learn, right? What was that childhood enthusiasm that lit up our life, that pointed to a bright and exciting future? And then life punches us in the face, gets in the way, is always telling us what we can't do, what we shouldn't do. And by going back to that childhood enthusiasm and then channeling it through an icon who managed to take his own childhood and turn it into not only a career, but a revolution in music, in culture, in musicianship, in instrumentation, in creativity, is like awesome. That's really
Right.
what it's all about.
Well said, man. I really, what you just said is it's amazing when you think about it, like in that context and how big that is. I mean, that's what I would want the family to know is that all we're trying to do is shine a light on it and do what, let everybody that's in that realm that loved that and loved him could share and celebrate his accomplishments. It's wonderful to read the comments in my thing, because what happens is people tell the stories of their meetings with Eddie Van Halen, their experiences in the 70s in Pasadena or anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the world. And they're wonderful stories that people tell. And it's just one more layer of really cool stuff that I get to see and read and enjoy just because I decided I wanted to go do that. I like I said, I started out doing a different podcast, and when he passed, I thought, you know what, these guys they're not the kind of guys who are going to toot their own horn, so I'm going to toot their horn for them, and I'm going to try to do them justice in the best way that I can, and try to keep it positive, like you said. And there's no agenda other than to celebrate my love for this band and for this guy who changed my entire life. I mean, I say it all the time. Had he not come around, he said the thing. I remember him saying this in an article. He said, "I don't know if I hadn't found the guitar, I'd probably be pumping gas. I'd probably be doing something similar."
It's like Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap. What would you be doing if you wouldn't be a world famous rock star? And he goes, Nigel Tufnell. He said, selling shoes. And then he goes into the routine. What kind of size are you?
Right. And I sold shoes.
Perfect.
I did that. And I sold guitars, and I sold shoes, and I sold defibrillators of all things to hospitals. That was my last corporate.
I'm a healthcare marketer too. I still do that in consulting work. To keep the lights on, I do healthcare marketing. So we're kindred souls in that way. Let me give you a little gift. Take it or leave it. I have 2 degrees of separation from Ed, and here's another story for your archive. You could consider it an apocryphal one, but I heard it. So I'm dating a woman in New Jersey, and her best friend, who grew up in California, had a one-nighter with Eddie. Okay. And I'm like you. I'm like an EVH fan, maniac, and I'm dying to hear the circumstances of this story. So she's not opening up. She's shy about it. She's not, boasting to her girlfriends that she was with Ed. But I finally get her on the speakerphone. I'm living in New York, and we call California, And she's like, all right, Mookie, I'm going to tell you about my one night with Ed. So it goes back. She's with her girlfriends and they're having dinner at Planet Hollywood.
Whoa,
All right.
wow.
In LA. And all of a sudden, Eddie and Alex just come walking in and they sit their ass down across the dining room. And they're like, woo, the Van Halen bros are here. So then they're chit-chatting and Eddie makes eye contact with her and instantly likes what he sees. So they're talking and she's acting coy. And then Alex waves at her like, don't be shy, come here. So she leaves her girlfriends, scoots across the dining room. She's welcomed by Eddie and Alex, and they shoot the shit for about a half hour, 45 minutes, And then Eddie looks at Alex like, get lost. And then Eddie asks her, like, do you have a car? Did you drive? And she's like, yeah, it's in the parking lot. Eddie goes, come on. So they go out to the parking lot, get in the car, things get steamy. And she drives up Mulholland Drive where she's got an apartment, brings Eddie in, and, they have quite an experience throughout the evening. Now, the way she told the story is it was all amazing, and I couldn't believe I was with Eddie Van Halen. And then she relates her favorite part of the story, which is in the morning, I made him waffles. And he's sitting there. Eddie Van Halen is at my breakfast table, small little Formica tabletop, little patio deck, little potted plant. And Eddie goes, can you pass the strawberry syrup, please? And she remembers just, passing it to Eddie. And the great Eddie Van Halen smiled, his big smile, pours the strawberry and is eating her waffles. And that was her favorite part. But it gets even better. My favorite part of the story is a couple of years later, Van Halen is doing the next tour, and she makes it a point of going to get great seats. So she gets like really good seats, not too far from the stage. And then Eddie's in the middle of his eruption solo, 20 minutes letting loose. And he's in it to win it. And he just randomly looks over into the crowd and sees her. And they make eye contact. And while Eddie's playing, he gives the famous thumbs up to her and nods like, hey, baby, I remember you. You're awesome. Thanks for coming. I love that story. And the thing I love most about it is the sense of gratitude and appreciation. And you could look at it as just another rock star fling story, but she was demure about it. And Eddie remembered her and like saw her. And while he's playing 20,000 people, middle of eruption, he gives her a little personal call out and wave. And to me, that captures the essence of Eddie, which is personal, empathetic, emotional, and appreciative. He's a human being. And he could have been just like, whatever, but he was.
Well, it's amazing that he did that. Oh, that guy I told you to chase the limousine. He was in front of him at the show.
Yeah, that's what came to mind. I felt I had to tell you that story because you're building your archive. But you're right. It's the same thing, which is like, thanks. We're both a part of this shared experience.
Yeah, and that's what it was at the Smithsonian. When I saw him the last time that I had a chance to meet him, and that was actually because I saw him in February, and then he came through town in September. So I saw him on the final tour, but that was the last time I saw him in person, of course. And yeah, and that last tour, that last year that I did meet him, that was like the best year of his life almost, it seemed like. And I was so grateful that I had met him in the middle of that. And in my room in here, not only do I have the picture that you're talking about of him here, but I have the magazine from that period, the Guitar World, that I think it's in the back wall here. Yeah, it's behind me actually, up there. You can't see it. Let's see. See it up there? Okay, so those Guitar Worlds, those came out and were shot around exactly the same time as that meeting was. And I thought it was so cool because his hair is the same in those, and it's right around the same period, within a month, I think, is what the photographer told me. And I actually went to this spot where you see up the spot up where the Guitar World is up there. It's Vasquez Rocks up in above LA, and I went up there and redid the shoot with my buddy from the podcast, Ruben Reza. We went up to the spot because he knew her. He lived up that way, and we went to that that's his last photo shoot outside by the the rocks from Star Trek. And so we went up there, and that's part of the Van Halen trail videos. So cool. He had his guitar with him as a replica of the '83 Kramer, and we went up there and did the whole shoot and everything. It was great. I had such a good time. And, I would have never gone to this place had I not wanted to go there for Van Halen. And it was such a joy to go. I was like, why didn't I come up here and spend the whole day instead of like a couple hours? Could have been up here all day.
Really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that it just really affords me an excuse to go out and do things that I would have never done my whole life. And it's all because of Edward.
Yep. So let's give an homage to the man, 71 years old, just a couple weeks ago. And I kind of felt like his spirit was around. Eddie was kind of like, these two guys have been, my fans for a long time. 10 minutes in either direction, we would have missed each other, maybe nudged the universe a little bit so we would connect. It precipitated this really fun podcast where we can extend the homage and just get more of the word out there. My listeners and viewers get to know you, get to know your podcast, and spread the word and spread the joy and spread what a lot of people don't often talk about, which is it's not about just fame and fortune and being a rock star. It's not just like Ziggy Stardust, I'll be a rock star and then everything will all work itself out. It's about let me be all that I can be and let me inspire those who, like me, have a dream, like a little dreamer, right? Just dream. Mm-hmm. And eventually it doesn't even matter if it gets big or not, whether it blows up or not, whether you become successful or not. As long as you live the life you love and you're doing it every damn day, who's keeping score? Who really gives a shit?
Well, that's the thing, the whole fame thing is overrated, and I think that's what happened with Eddie. It became so overwhelming. And so, there's a blessing in not always getting what you want. Sometimes you're not meant to. It's like my mother said this one thing. She used to tell me this when I was in my 20s. There's a Garth Brooks song called "Thank God for Unanswered Prayers" or something like that, right? It's a song about sometimes it's better that it didn't work out the way that you thought you should have, and sometimes that's the way it's supposed to work out. And for whatever happens with any of this, it's my experiences that I'll take with me in the end.
Yeah, and it's the great people you meet and talk to along the way, right? Yes. I just spent a couple hours talking to you, 2.5 hours plus.
Fun, right?
Awesome. What the hell else would have been better than to talk Van Halen with the #1 Van Halen archivist, fan, and podcaster? Fucking A.
I'm going to play that back for my wife about 10 times over so she can
put it on a loop. Put it on when you wake up. When you wake up in the morning.
Put it on her phone. I should put it on her phone to let it just wake her up in the morning. All right.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners and viewers, Bald Ambition, we've had Jeff Goebel, the other bald guy. As we were mentioning, go to Jeff, check out his channel. I'm going to put the links in the description in the pod. If you want to know anything and everything about the greatest band, can I say it, since Led Zeppelin? I think so, and revolutionary for a lot of the same reasons, maybe a little bit different in style. But Van Halen, the cultural phenomenon. the musical genius, the brothers, the conflict, the controversy, and the inspiration, all captured with Jeff's terrific podcast interviews of friends, family, colleagues, other famous musicians talking about Van Halen. Thanks so much for all you do, Jeff. We really appreciate it. And
Thank you,
let's
Mookie.
follow up in a little while to see where the VH is going. And we got other VH kind of line extensions and sequels. We got Wolfgang, Alex is still kicking. Hagar and Roth are still talking shit about each other.
Yeah, they love each other.
Never a dull moment. Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.